Grizzly bear mauls, 42-year-old fisherman in Alaska, July 8, 2025. The morning of July 5, 2025, dawned with the kind of crystalline clarity that made the Kenai Peninsula of Alaska feel like the edge of the world. John Robert Miller stood on the deck of his weathered Ford F-350, watching the sun paint the Chugach Mountains in shades of amber and rose. At 42 years old, John had spent nearly 2 decades working the commercial fishing boats out of Homer. But this week was different. This week was about family, about reconnecting with his younger brother Mark after 3 years of sporadic phone calls and missed holidays. The weight of their father's recent death still hung between them, unspoken but present in every shared glance and nervous laugh they'd exchanged since Mark's flight landed at Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport 3 days ago. Mark Daniel Miller, 38 years old and perpetually restless, had driven up from his software development job in Portland specifically for this trip. Where John was broad-shouldered and weathered from years of hauling nets and fighting Pacific storms, Mark remained lean and pale, his hands soft from keyboard work rather than rope burns. The brothers shared the same dark hair and green eyes inherited from their Irish grandmother, but time and geography had carved different men from similar clay. John's wife, Sarah Elizabeth Miller, had packed their gear with the methodical precision of someone who'd sent her husband into Alaska's wilderness dozens of times before. She knew which first aid supplies to double-check, which emergency beacon batteries to replace, and exactly how many protein bars to pack for 2 grown men who would inevitably underestimate their appetites. The plan was elegantly simple. 5 days of fishing and camping along the Kenai River near Soldotna, focusing on the legendary runs of king salmon that drew anglers from around the world. John had secured permits for the prime spots along the river, areas he'd fished since his teenage years when their father, Robert William Miller, had first brought him north from their home in Fairbanks. Those early trips had forged John's love for Alaska's untamed spaces, teaching him to read water currents and weather patterns, to respect the power of nature while finding his place within it. Mark's relationship with the wilderness was more theoretical, filtered through documentaries and adventure novels rather than direct experience. His last camping trip had been a sanitized weekend at a KOA campground outside Portland, complete with electrical hookups and heated shower facilities. Their base camp was established on a gravel bar approximately 12 miles northeast of Soldotna, accessible via a combination of the Sterling Highway and a series of increasingly rough logging roads that tested even John's 4-wheel drive. The location offered prime access to a stretch of the Kenai River known locally as Murphy's Bend, named for a prospector who'd worked placer claims in the area during the 1960s. The bend created a deep pool where salmon congregated before continuing their upstream spawning run, and the configuration of fallen timber provided excellent cover for both fish and the anglers pursuing them. More importantly for their purposes, the site was isolated enough to provide the solitude both brothers craved, yet close enough to civilization that emergency services could reach them within reasonable time, if needed. Dr. Patricia Lynn Kowalski, a wildlife biologist with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, had been monitoring grizzly bear activity in the Kenai Peninsula region throughout the early summer of 2025. At 34 years old, Dr. Kowalski represented a new generation of field researchers who combined traditional tracking skills with modern GPS technology and genetic sampling techniques. Her preliminary reports from June indicated increased bear activity along the Kenai River corridor, attributed to both the exceptional salmon runs that year and unusual weather patterns that had disrupted normal feeding cycles. 2 separate incidents of property damage at remote cabins had been documented within a 15-mile radius of Murphy's Bend, including one case where a large male grizzly had completely destroyed a food cache despite multiple layers of bear-resistant containers. The bear that would ultimately cross paths with the Miller brothers was a mature male grizzly, estimated at 800 to 900 pounds based on track measurements and photographic evidence collected by Dr. Kowalski's team. Local guides had nicknamed him Goliath after several encounters during the 2024 season when the bear had displayed unusually aggressive territorial behavior around salmon fishing spots. Unlike typical grizzly behavior patterns that involved avoiding human contact whenever possible, Goliath had shown increasing boldness in approaching occupied campsites and fishing areas. Trail cameras had captured footage of the bear systematically investigating human scent trails and showing particular interest in areas where fish cleaning had occurred, behavior that wildlife management officials found concerning enough to warrant enhanced monitoring protocols. Thomas Eugene Hartley, a retired Alaska State Trooper turned wilderness guide, had been operating fishing expeditions in the Soldotna area since 2018. At 56 years old, Tom possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of local wildlife patterns and had personally documented over 300 bear encounters during his law enforcement career. His guide service, Kenai Wilderness Adventures, maintained detailed logs of animal activity and regularly shared information with state wildlife management agencies. Tom's records from early July 2025 showed an unusual concentration of bear sign along the upper Kenai River, including multiple instances of salmon carcass caches and territorial marking behavior that suggested competition between several large males for prime fishing territories. The weather forecast for the week of July 5th through July 12th called for typical summer conditions in south-central Alaska. Daytime temperatures in the low 70s, overnight lows in the mid-40s, with scattered afternoon thundershowers possible. Wind patterns were expected to remain light and variable, creating ideal conditions for both salmon fishing and camping. However, meteorological data from the National Weather Service office in Anchorage indicated a slow-moving low-pressure system approaching from the Gulf of Alaska that could bring significant weather changes by the middle of the week. Such systems often triggered increased wildlife activity as animals adjusted their feeding and movement patterns in response to barometric pressure changes. Rebecca Marie Santos, a freelance outdoor photographer based in Seward, had been documenting Alaska's summer wildlife activity for a coffee table book project commissioned by a major publishing house in New York. At 29 years old, Rebecca combined artistic vision with serious outdoor skills, honed through years of backcountry photography assignments throughout the Pacific Northwest. Her work required extended periods in remote locations, often camping alone while waiting for optimal lighting and wildlife behavior opportunities. Rebecca's photographic equipment included multiple telephoto lenses specifically designed for wildlife photography, allowing her to capture detailed images from safe distances. Her planned itinerary for July 2025 included several days along the Kenai River system, focusing on the intersection of salmon runs and predator activity that created some of Alaska's most dramatic wildlife scenes. The Miller brothers arrived at their chosen campsite during the early afternoon of July 5th, after a 3-hour drive from John's home in Soldotna, followed by 45 minutes of careful navigation along progressively rougher logging roads. The final 2 miles required low-range four-wheel drive and careful attention to avoid the deeper washouts created by spring snowmelt. Their campsite occupied a relatively flat area, approximately 100 yards from the river's edge, sheltered by a stand of mature white spruce trees that provided both wind protection and natural camouflage. The location offered easy access to the water while maintaining sufficient elevation to avoid potential flooding from summer thunderstorms or beaver dam releases upstream. John's camping setup reflected years of experience in Alaska's unpredictable conditions. His 4-season mountaineering tent was designed to withstand high winds and heavy precipitation, while his sleeping system included both a down sleeping bag rated to 20 degrees below zero and a closed-cell foam pad for insulation from ground cold. His cooking area was established downwind from the tent and at least 50 yards away, following bear safety protocols that had become second nature through decades of wilderness experience. A bear-resistant food container, properly certified by the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee, held all their food supplies and toiletries in a location 100 yards from both the sleeping and cooking areas. Mark's gear told the story of good intentions hampered by inexperience with Alaska's specific challenges. His three-season tent was adequate for the expected weather conditions, but lacked the structural integrity needed for sudden wind events common along river corridors. His sleeping bag was rated for temperatures only down to 40 degrees, creating potential problems if overnight temperatures dropped unexpectedly. Most concerning from a safety perspective, Mark had packed several packages of beef jerky and energy bars in his personal pack, rather than transferring them to the bear-resistant container, a mistake that John corrected immediately upon discovering it during their camp setup. The first evening passed peacefully, with both brothers enjoying the profound silence that descended over the Alaskan wilderness as darkness finally arrived near midnight. They'd successfully caught and released several smaller salmon during their initial fishing session, building confidence in their chosen location while practicing the techniques John had demonstrated for reading water currents and identifying likely holding spots for larger fish. Their dinner consisted of freeze-dried camping meals, supplemented with fresh bread and cheese Sarah had packed, eaten while watching the river's surface dimple with rising fish, as the light gradually faded into the endless twilight of an Alaskan summer night. July 6th began with morning temperatures in the upper 40s and a light mist rising from the river's surface as the sun climbed over the surrounding ridgelines. Both brothers were awake by 6 o'clock, driven by a combination of excitement and the biological rhythms that made sleep difficult during Alaska's compressed summer darkness. Their breakfast of oatmeal and coffee was consumed quickly, with both men eager to take advantage of the prime fishing conditions that typically occurred during the first few hours after sunrise. The salmon run was approaching its peak intensity, and John's experience suggested they had perhaps a week-long window for optimal fishing before the run began to diminish. Their fishing spot was located approximately 400 yards downstream from camp, where a large sweeper tree created a deep hole against the far bank. The fallen timber provided perfect ambush cover for salmon, while simultaneously creating the kind of complex current structure that concentrated fish in predictable locations. John demonstrated the proper techniques for reading the water, explaining how subtle differences in surface texture revealed underlying structure and current patterns. Mark proved to be a quick learner, adapting his Portland-honed fly fishing skills to the larger gear and more aggressive tactics required for Alaska's king salmon. By mid-morning, both brothers had landed several respectable fish, including a 20-pound king salmon that provided Mark with his first taste of the powerful runs and aerial displays that made these fish legendary among anglers worldwide. The success created a euphoric mood that temporarily dissolved the subtle tensions that had characterized their relationship since their father's funeral 3 months earlier. For the first time in years, they were simply brothers enjoying a shared adventure, connected by the immediate challenges of reading water and fighting fish rather than the complex emotional landscape of family loss and geographical separation. Dr. Kowalski's research team was conducting routine monitoring activities approximately 6 miles upstream from the Miller brothers' location on the morning of July 6th. Her field notes from that day documented fresh grizzly bear tracks along multiple salmon spawning areas, including several sets of prints that matched the distinctive pad measurements associated with the bear they designated as individual Alpha 7 in their tracking database. The tracks showed evidence of recent fishing activity, with salmon scales and partially consumed carcasses indicating successful hunting behavior. More significantly, the spacing and depth of the tracks suggested the bear was moving downstream along the river corridor, following the same route that would eventually bring it into contact with human activity near Murphy's Bend. Wildlife photographer Rebecca Santos had established a temporary blind approximately 2 miles upstream from Dr. Kowalski's research site, positioning herself to document the intersection of salmon runs and grizzly bear feeding behavior that represented some of Alaska's most spectacular wildlife activity. Her telephoto equipment allowed her to maintain safe distances while capturing detailed images of bear behavior patterns that few humans ever witnessed firsthand. Rebecca's field notes from July 6th recorded observations of at least 3 different grizzly bears actively fishing along a half-mile stretch of river, behavior that indicated exceptional salmon density and potentially increased competition for prime feeding locations. The afternoon of July 6th brought rising temperatures and increased insect activity that drove both brothers back to camp during the hottest part of the day. They spent several hours in the shade, sharing stories from their respective lives while maintaining their fishing gear and planning strategies for the evening session. Mark talked about his software projects and the rapidly evolving technology landscape that dominated his professional life, while John shared tales from his commercial fishing experiences, including close encounters with storms and mechanical failures that had tested both his seamanship skills and physical endurance. These conversations provided glimpses of the men they'd become during their years apart, revealing both similarities and differences that reflected their divergent life paths. Their evening fishing session proved even more productive than the morning effort, with both brothers landing fish consistently enough to be selective about which ones to keep for dinner. John demonstrated proper fish cleaning techniques while emphasizing the critical importance of disposing of all organic waste in ways that wouldn't attract bears to their immediate camping area. Fish entrails and scales were buried in a deep hole at least 200 yards from camp, while the cleaned fillets were stored in sealed containers within the bear-resistant food cache. These protocols represented decades of accumulated wisdom from Alaska's outdoor community, hard-won knowledge that could mean the difference between a successful trip and a potentially deadly encounter with the peninsula's apex predators. The second night passed without incident, though both brothers reported hearing sounds in the forest that might have indicated wildlife activity. John's experience allowed him to identify most of the nocturnal sounds as normal forest activity. Owls calling, small mammals moving through underbrush, and the occasional splash of salmon jumping in the nearby river. Mark's urban background made him more sensitive to unfamiliar sounds, creating a mild anxiety that he managed through rational analysis and trust in his brother's superior wilderness knowledge. Neither man was aware that their campsite was being investigated by a large grizzly bear during the early morning hours, when wind patterns carried human scent downstream toward areas where the bear had been fishing. July 7th dawned clear and cool, with unlimited visibility and light winds that created perfect conditions for both fishing and wildlife observation. The brothers were on the water before sunrise, taking advantage of the peak feeding period that typically occurred during the first hour of daylight. Their technique had improved markedly over the previous day's efforts, with Mark beginning to read water patterns independently and John fine-tuning his presentations to match the specific conditions they encountered. The salmon run continued at peak intensity, providing almost continuous action that kept both men focused on the immediate challenges of fighting and landing fish, rather than broader environmental awareness that might have detected signs of bear activity in their vicinity. Thomas Hartley's guide service had clients fishing approximately 3 miles downstream from the Miller brothers' location on July 7th, providing another data point in the developing pattern of bear activity along the river corridor. Tom's group observed fresh grizzly tracks on a gravel bar during their mid-morning break, tracks that appeared to have been made during the previous night's low-light period. The tracks showed evidence of systematic investigation of human scent trails, including areas where anglers had cleaned fish and temporarily cached equipment. Tom's experience with grizzly behavior patterns suggested these tracks indicated a bear that was becoming increasingly bold in its interactions with human activity, a development that warranted enhanced caution among all river users in the area. Dr. Kowalski's team expanded their monitoring activities on July 7th to include the lower river sections, where increasing numbers of recreational anglers were reporting wildlife encounters. Her portable GPS units recorded multiple sets of grizzly bear tracks along a 5-mile stretch of river, with several track sets showing the distinctive measurements and gait patterns associated with individual Alpha 7, the large male bear they'd been monitoring throughout the early summer. The bear's movement pattern suggested it was systematically working downstream along the salmon run, following food sources while simultaneously investigating areas of human activity that might provide additional feeding opportunities. Rebecca Santos captured her first photographs of individual Alpha 7 on the afternoon of July 7th, using extreme telephoto lenses to document the bear's fishing behavior from a distance of over 400 yards. Her images revealed a massive animal displaying exceptional confidence and skill while hunting salmon in shallow water areas where most grizzlies preferred to avoid potential human contact. The bear's behavior suggested years of successful interaction with human-influenced environments, creating a comfort level with human proximity that wildlife management officials typically considered problematic. Rebecca's photographs would later become crucial evidence in the investigation of subsequent events, providing visual documentation of the bear's size, condition, and behavioral patterns immediately before its encounter with the Miller brothers. The evening of July 7th marked a subtle shift in the environmental conditions around Murphy's Bend, though neither brother was sufficiently experienced in reading natural signs to recognize the change. Barometric pressure was beginning to drop as the weather system forecasters had identified continued its approach from the Gulf of Alaska, creating atmospheric conditions that often triggered increased wildlife activity. More immediately significant, wind patterns had shifted to carry scent from the brothers' campsite directly toward areas where grizzly bears had been fishing throughout the day, essentially advertising the presence of food sources and human activity to any bears working the river corridor. Their dinner that evening consisted of fresh salmon fillets prepared over an open fire, supplemented with vegetables and seasonings Sarah had packed for the trip. The meal represented a celebration of their successful fishing and the gradual rebuilding of their brotherly relationship, though both men remained unaware that their cooking activities were being monitored by a large grizzly bear positioned approximately 200 yards upstream from their location. The bear's behavior that evening differed significantly from typical grizzly patterns, showing none of the usual caution and avoidance that characterized most bear-human interactions in Alaska. Instead, individual Alpha 7 displayed systematic investigation behavior, moving closer to human activity while using available cover to remain undetected. John's experience with Alaska's wildlife led him to maintain proper food storage protocols, despite the relaxed atmosphere created by their fishing success and improving family dynamics. All food items were secured in the bear-resistant container before darkness fell, and cooking equipment was thoroughly cleaned and stored away from their sleeping area. However, the scent molecules from their fish cleaning and cooking activities had already dispersed throughout the surrounding forest, creating an olfactory trail that was easily detectable by any bear within a several-mile radius. Grizzly bears possess a sense of smell approximately 7 times more sensitive than bloodhounds, allowing them to detect food sources from distances that would surprise most recreational outdoor enthusiasts. The night of July 7th brought the first signs of changing weather conditions, with increasing wind speeds and the arrival of high-altitude clouds that obscured many of the stars both brothers had enjoyed during their previous evenings in camp. Neither man slept particularly well, though they attributed their restlessness to excitement about the next day's fishing rather than any subconscious awareness of potential danger. Mark's urban background made him particularly sensitive to unfamiliar forest sounds, while John's commercial fishing experience had taught him to sleep lightly in potentially dangerous environments. Both brothers reported later that they'd experienced unusually vivid dreams that night, though neither could recall specific details that might have provided insight into their subconscious processing of environmental cues. Individual Alpha 7 spent significant portions of the night investigating the Miller brothers' campsite, approaching to within 50 yards of their tent while they slept. The bear's behavior demonstrated sophisticated intelligence and problem-solving ability, systematically testing different approach routes while monitoring human activity levels and wind patterns that might reveal its presence. Wildlife experts would later theorize that the bear was conducting reconnaissance activities, gathering information about human behaviors and defensive capabilities that would inform its subsequent actions. This level of tactical planning represented unusual behavior for a grizzly bear, suggesting either exceptional individual intelligence or previous experience with human encounters that had shaped its approach strategies. July 8, 2025 began with overcast skies and rising humidity that indicated the approaching weather system was beginning to influence local conditions. Both brothers were awake by 5:30 a.m., driven by internal rhythms that had adapted to Alaska's summer light cycles and the anticipation of what they hoped would be their most productive fishing day yet. Their breakfast conversation focused on technique refinements and location strategies that might improve their success rate, with John sharing advanced tactics he'd learned from commercial fishing guides, and Mark contributing observations about fish behavior patterns he'd noticed during their previous sessions. The barometric pressure had dropped significantly overnight, creating atmospheric conditions that wildlife biologists recognized as triggers for increased animal activity. Dr. Kowalski's research had documented correlations between weather system approaches and aggressive behavior among Alaska's large predators, though the mechanisms underlying these relationships remain subjects of ongoing scientific investigation. The pressure changes appeared to influence both feeding urgency and territorial behavior, creating situations where normally predictable wildlife patterns could shift dramatically within short time periods. Their fishing location that morning was a deep pool approximately 300 yards downstream from their established spot, an area John had identified during their previous day's exploration as holding exceptional numbers of large salmon. The new location required a slightly longer walk from camp and involved crossing a small tributary stream that fed into the main river through a series of beaver ponds. The terrain around the new fishing spot was more complex than their previous locations, with dense undergrowth and fallen timber that provided excellent cover for wildlife while simultaneously limiting visibility for human occupants. Mark's fishing skills had improved dramatically over their 3 days together, and he was beginning to display the confidence and technique that would allow him to fish independently while John explored other sections of water. This division of effort represented a significant milestone in their trip, allowing both brothers to cover more water while maintaining the social connection that had been their primary objective. John positioned himself at the head of the pool where deeper water provided holding areas for the largest fish, while Mark worked the tail-out section where current patterns concentrated smaller but more numerous salmon. The morning's fishing exceeded even their elevated expectations, with both brothers landing multiple fish within the first hour of daylight. Mark successfully landed his largest salmon of the trip, a 32-pound king that provided an epic 20-minute battle testing both his equipment and physical endurance. John's experience allowed him to consistently target the largest fish in the pool, resulting in several specimens that approached the 40-pound mark class that represented trophy-quality salmon by any standard. Their success created an atmosphere of celebration and achievement that temporarily overwhelmed the environmental awareness both men should have maintained while occupying prime wildlife habitat. Dr. Kowalski's team was conducting aerial survey work on the morning of July 8th, using a chartered helicopter to document salmon run intensity and associated predator activity throughout the Kenai River watershed. Their observations revealed exceptional grizzly bear density along the river corridor, with multiple large males occupying territories that would normally support far fewer animals. The high salmon density was creating unusual competitive dynamics among the bear population, leading to increased territorial disputes and more aggressive behavior patterns than typical for the region. Most significantly, several bears were showing decreased avoidance behavior toward human activity, suggesting habituation processes that wildlife management officials considered extremely problematic. Rebecca Santos had relocated her photography operations to a position approximately 1 mile upstream from the Miller Brothers fishing location, following reports of exceptional grizzly bear activity in that section of the river. Her telephoto equipment allowed her to document bear behavior from safe distances, while capturing the kind of dramatic wildlife imagery that represented the core of her professional work. Rebecca's field notes from the morning of July 8th recorded observations of individual Alpha 7 moving downstream along the river corridor, displaying hunting behavior that suggested the bear was actively following salmon concentrations rather than simply occupying a fixed territory. Thomas Hartley's guide service had cancelled their scheduled trips for July 8th due to weather concerns and increased reports of aggressive wildlife behavior in the area. Tom's decision reflected decades of experience reading environmental conditions and risk factors that might not be immediately apparent to less experienced outdoor enthusiasts. His guide service maintained detailed protocols for assessing wildlife risk factors, including barometric pressure changes, unusual animal behavior reports, and seasonal patterns that influenced predator activity levels. The combination of factors present on July 8th exceeded Tom's comfort threshold for client safety, leading to the cancellation decision that would later prove prescient. The Miller Brothers fishing session continued through mid-morning with exceptional success, though neither man was maintaining the level of environmental awareness that their location and circumstances demanded. Their focus on fishing technique and fish-fighting activities prevented them from detecting the subtle signs that might have indicated predator activity in their vicinity. John's commercial fishing background had taught him to maintain situational awareness while working on the ocean, but the river environment presented different challenges and risk factors that required modified vigilance protocols he hadn't fully internalized. Individual Alpha 7 had been systematically approaching the brothers' fishing location throughout the morning, using available cover and wind patterns to remain undetected while monitoring human activity patterns. The bear's behavior demonstrated sophisticated tactical awareness, suggesting either exceptional individual intelligence or previous experience with similar situations that had taught it effective approach strategies. Wildlife experts would later analyze the bear's behavior pattern as representing predatory investigation rather than defensive territorial response, a distinction that carried significant implications for understanding the subsequent encounter. Mark was fighting a large salmon in the tail-out section of the pool when he first became aware of unusual sounds in the forest behind their position. His urban background made him sensitive to environmental changes that John might have dismissed as normal wildlife activity, though his inexperience with Alaska's wilderness prevented him from accurately interpreting the significance of what he was hearing. The sounds suggested large animal movement through dense undergrowth, accompanied by what might have been heavy breathing or vocalizations that didn't match any wildlife sounds he'd learned to recognize during their trip. John was positioned approximately 30 yards upstream from Mark when his brother first mentioned hearing unusual sounds. His attention focused on a particularly large salmon that had taken his lure near a submerged log structure at the head of the pool. The fish was providing an exceptional fight that demanded his complete concentration, preventing him from immediately responding to Mark's concerns about potential wildlife activity in their vicinity. This division of attention between fishing activity and environmental awareness represented exactly the kind of situation that Alaska's wilderness safety protocols were designed to prevent. The first visual confirmation of bear presence came when Mark noticed movement in the dense undergrowth approximately 50 yards behind their fishing position. His initial sighting was brief and partially obscured by intervening vegetation, but sufficient to confirm the presence of a large, dark-colored animal that was clearly investigating their location. Mark's immediate response was to alert John while simultaneously beginning to back away from the water's edge toward more open terrain that might provide better visibility and potential escape routes. His urban background hadn't prepared him for the paralyzing combination of awe and terror that accompanied his first close encounter with Alaska's apex predator. John's response to Mark's bear warning reflected decades of Alaska wilderness experience, immediately abandoning his fishing activities to assess the situation and implement appropriate safety protocols. His first action was to locate the bear and evaluate its behavior, size, and apparent intentions, while simultaneously positioning himself between the bear and his brother. John's experience with grizzly bears had taught him that most encounters could be resolved through appropriate human behavior, including avoiding eye contact, speaking in calm tones, and slowly backing away from the bear's location while providing it with clear escape routes. Individual Alpha 7's behavior during the initial contact phase differed significantly from typical grizzly bear response patterns, showing none of the wariness and avoidance that characterized most bear-human encounters in Alaska. Instead of withdrawing when it detected human presence, the bear continued its systematic approach while displaying what wildlife experts would later categorize as predatory investigation behavior. The bear's body language suggested confidence and determination rather than defensive aggression, indicating a level of comfort with human proximity that represented an extremely dangerous situation for any people in the area. The bear emerged from the dense undergrowth at a distance of approximately 40 yards from the brothers' position, revealing itself to be an exceptionally large male grizzly bear in prime physical condition. John's immediate assessment suggested the animal weighed between 800 and 900 pounds, placing it among the largest grizzly bears found anywhere in North America. The bear's coat showed the silver-tipped appearance that gave grizzly bears their name, while its massive head and pronounced shoulder hump indicated the kind of mature male that dominated territories and food sources throughout Alaska's wilderness areas. Mark's initial reaction to seeing the full size of the approaching bear was a combination of fascination and terror that temporarily paralyzed his to take appropriate defensive actions. His urban background had provided no preparation for encountering an animal of such overwhelming physical presence, and his mind struggled to process the reality that he was facing a predator capable of killing him within seconds. The bear's movements displayed fluid grace, despite its massive size, suggesting athletic ability and coordination that would make it virtually impossible to escape through flight if it decided to attack. John's experience with commercial fishing had exposed him to numerous dangerous situations that required immediate decision-making under extreme stress, skills that proved invaluable during the initial phases of their bear encounter. His assessment of the situation suggested they were facing a predatory bear rather than a defensive animal, a distinction that required completely different response strategies. Predatory bears couldn't be deterred through submission behaviors or noise-making activities that might prove effective against defensive bears, instead requiring aggressive counterattacks or successful escape to areas the bear couldn't access. The brothers' fishing equipment became significant factors in their tactical situation, as both men were carrying rods, tackle boxes, and other gear that could either hinder their mobility or potentially serve as improvised weapons if the encounter escalated to physical contact. John's experience suggested that maintaining possession of their gear might prove important if they needed to defend themselves, while also recognizing that encumbering equipment could prevent effective escape if flight became necessary. The decision of whether to abandon their equipment or attempt to retain it represented one of many split-second tactical choices that would influence their survival chances. Individual Alpha 7 continued its systematic approach toward the brothers' position, displaying none of the hesitation or avoidance behavior that might have suggested the encounter could be resolved peacefully. The bear's movements indicated it was evaluating their defensive capabilities, while simultaneously positioning itself to prevent their escape toward the most obvious retreat routes. Wildlife experts would later analyze the bear's tactical approach as demonstrating sophisticated planning ability and situational awareness that exceeded typical grizzly bear behavior patterns. The river's configuration at their fishing location created a tactical disadvantage for the brothers, limiting their escape options to areas where the bear could easily intercept them due to its superior speed and agility in rough terrain. John's assessment of their situation suggested they were positioned in what military tacticians would describe as a kill zone, where their opponent held every advantage in terms of mobility, terrain familiarity, and physical capability. The realization that they might be facing an unavoidable confrontation with one of North America's most dangerous predators created a level of stress that threatened to overwhelm both men's ability to think and act effectively. Mark's inexperience with dangerous wildlife encounters became a significant liability as the situation developed, his urban background providing no framework for understanding appropriate responses to predatory bear behavior. His instinctive reactions involved behaviors that could trigger attack responses from the bear, including rapid movements, elevated vocalizations, and attempts to hide behind insufficient cover that would only serve to stimulate the bear's hunting instincts. John's primary tactical challenge became managing his brother's panic responses while simultaneously developing strategies for dealing with an increasingly dangerous predator. The bear closed to within 20 yards of their position before pausing to assess the situation, providing both brothers with their clearest view of the animal that now dominated their immediate environment. Individual Alpha 7's physical presence exceeded even John's considerable experience with Alaska's wildlife, representing what appeared to be a prime example of grizzly bear development and conditioning. The bear's eyes showed intelligence and calculation rather than the wild aggression that might have suggested defensive behavior, creating an impression of controlled evaluation that wildlife experts would later recognize as characteristic of predatory investigation. John's tactical assessment suggested their best survival strategy involved presenting a unified defense, while slowly retreating toward terrain features that might provide advantages in terms of visibility or accessibility. His commercial fishing experience had taught him that successful responses to maritime emergencies required maintaining calm decision-making capabilities despite extreme stress, skills that proved directly applicable to their current crisis. The key was avoiding actions that might trigger an immediate attack, while simultaneously positioning themselves for either effective defense or successful escape if the opportunity arose. The sound of Mark's voice calling out in panic broke the tactical silence that John had been trying to maintain, potentially triggering the predatory response they had been attempting to avoid. Mark's urban background had provided no training in maintaining silence during dangerous wildlife encounters, and his stress response included vocalizations that could stimulate attack behavior in predatory bears. John's immediate challenge became controlling the acoustic environment while managing an increasingly unstable tactical situation that was rapidly moving beyond their ability to influence through behavioral responses. Individual Alpha 7's reaction to Mark's vocalization was immediate and unambiguous, shifting from investigation behavior to active predatory approach that eliminated any remaining hope of peaceful resolution. The bear's body language changed dramatically, displaying the kind of focused intention that wildlife experts recognized as indicating imminent attack behavior. The bear's movements became more direct and purposeful, suggesting it had completed its assessment phase and was now committed to whatever course of action its evaluation had determined was appropriate. John's combat experience during his younger years in the Alaska National Guard provided some framework for responding to life-threatening situations, though nothing in his military training had prepared him for hand-to-hand combat with an 800-pound predator equipped with 4-inch claws and crushing jaw power. His immediate priority became positioning himself between the bear and Mark, while attempting to identify anything in their immediate environment that might serve as an effective weapon or defensive barrier. The river behind them prevented retreat, while the dense forest limited their lateral movement options. The bear's final approach covered the remaining 20 yards in approximately 3 seconds, demonstrating the explosive acceleration that made grizzly bears virtually impossible to escape through flight once they committed to attack behavior. Mark's attempt to run toward the river represented exactly the wrong tactical response, triggering the bear's pursuit instincts while simultaneously separating him from John's potential defensive assistance. The brothers' coordinated response strategy collapsed as Mark's panic overwhelmed his ability to follow John's shouted instructions about staying together and facing the bear. Individual Alpha 7's attack sequence began with a charge that targeted Mark as the more vulnerable and isolated of the two brothers, demonstrating tactical decision-making that wildlife experts would later recognize as representing exceptional predatory intelligence. The bear's approach angle cut off Mark's escape route toward the river, while simultaneously positioning the bear to deal with John's potential intervention from behind. The tactical sophistication of the bear's attack plan suggested either remarkable individual intelligence or previous experience with multiple human encounters that had taught it effective strategies. John's desperate attempt to intervene in the attack involved rushing toward the bear while shouting and waving his arms in an effort to redirect its attention from Mark to himself. His commercial fishing background had exposed him to numerous emergency situations requiring immediate action despite incomplete information and overwhelming danger, experience that proved valuable in maintaining decision-making capability, despite the surreal horror of watching his brother being attacked by a massive predator. The intervention represented John's only tactical option for potentially saving Mark's life, despite the virtual certainty that it would result in his own death or serious injury. The first physical contact between individual Alpha 7 and Mark occurred when the bear's massive paw struck Mark's shoulder, spinning him around and knocking him to the ground, with sufficient force to separate his shoulder and fracture several ribs. The impact demonstrated the overwhelming physical power differential between humans and grizzly bears, with the bear's casual swipe delivering more force than most humans could generate with their strongest deliberate strike. Mark's immediate injury pattern included both blunt trauma from the impact and penetrating wounds from the bear's claws, creating multiple medical emergencies that would require immediate treatment to prevent death from blood loss or internal injuries. Mark's screams during the initial contact phase carried for miles through the river valley, alerting other outdoor enthusiasts and wildlife researchers to the ongoing emergency while simultaneously attracting additional predator attention to their location. The vocalizations represented both involuntary pain responses and desperate attempts to summon help, though the remote location and limited human activity in the area made immediate rescue assistance unlikely. Rebecca Santos heard the screams from her photography position over a mile away and immediately began moving toward the sound while activating her emergency communication equipment to alert search and rescue authorities. Individual Alpha 7's attack behavior during the initial contact phase demonstrated the systematic efficiency that made grizzly bears among North America's most effective predators. Rather than engaging in the wild mauling behavior that characterized defensive bear attacks, the bear's actions showed calculated precision designed to quickly disable its prey while minimizing its own risk of injury. The bear's tactical approach suggested it was treating the encounter as a hunting situation rather than a territorial dispute, employing techniques that wildlife experts recognized as characteristic of predatory rather than defensive behavior. John's intervention attempt succeeded in redirecting the bear's attention from Mark to himself, though at the cost of placing himself within range of the bear's devastating physical capabilities. His approach strategy involved attempting to strike the bear's sensitive nose area while simultaneously positioning himself to shield Mark from continued attack, tactics that represented his best understanding of anti-bear fighting techniques, despite their minimal likelihood of success against such an overwhelmingly powerful opponent. The intervention demonstrated exceptional courage and family loyalty, though it also ensured that both brothers would become casualties rather than potentially limiting the damage to one victim. The bear's response to John's intervention involved a tactical shift that demonstrated remarkable situational awareness and adaptability, simultaneously maintaining pressure on Mark while engaging John as a secondary threat. Individual Alpha 7's ability to manage multiple opponents while operating in complex terrain represented cognitive abilities that exceeded typical grizzly bear behavior patterns, suggesting either exceptional individual intelligence or previous experience with similar tactical situations. The bear's combat effectiveness against multiple human opponents created a situation that was virtually impossible for the brothers to survive without external intervention or exceptional luck. Mark's attempts to escape the bear's continued attacks were hampered by his initial injuries and his urban background's lack of preparation for combat situations involving life-or-death physical confrontation. His movements became increasingly uncoordinated as shock and blood loss began affecting his motor control and decision-making capabilities, creating a downward spiral where his reduced effectiveness made him increasingly vulnerable to continued attack. The psychological trauma of being attacked by such a powerful predator added another layer of impairment that further reduced his survival chances. John's hand-to-hand combat with individual Alpha 7 lasted approximately 90 seconds and represented one of the most unequal contests imaginable between human and wildlife opponents. Despite his commercial fishing background's physical conditioning and his military training's combat techniques, John's human limitations made effective resistance virtually impossible against a predator that outweighed him by over 400 pounds and possessed natural weapons that could penetrate human tissue with minimal effort. His defensive efforts succeeded primarily in prolonging the encounter rather than inflicting significant damage on his opponent. The bear's attack pattern during its engagement with John demonstrated systematic targeting of areas that would quickly disable human opponents, including strikes to the head, torso, and limbs that would prevent effective resistance or escape attempts. Individual Alpha 7's combat techniques suggested learned behavior that had been refined through previous encounters, possibly with other humans or large prey species that had taught the bear effective methods for quickly overwhelming opponents. The bear's tactical sophistication created a situation where John's survival depended more on the bear's decision-making than on his own defensive capabilities. Mark's position during John's engagement with the bear allowed him to observe the overwhelming physical mismatch between his brother and their attacker, creating psychological trauma that would persist long after any physical injuries healed. His urban background had provided no preparation for witnessing such raw violence, and the helplessness he felt while watching John being attacked by the massive predator created guilt and horror that would require extensive psychological treatment to resolve. The visual memory of his brother's defensive struggle against impossible odds would become a recurring nightmare that disrupted his mental health for years following the incident. Individual Alpha 7's attack on John reached its climax when the bear succeeded in knocking him to the ground and began applying the kind of systematic mauling behavior that grizzly bears used to subdue large prey species. The bear's tactical approach involved using its massive weight to pin John while simultaneously employing its claws and teeth to inflict the kind of devastating injuries that would quickly eliminate any possibility of continued resistance. John's protective positioning over vital organs and his attempts to shield his head and neck represented textbook defensive techniques, though their effectiveness was limited by the overwhelming power differential between human and bear. The duration of individual Alpha 7's attack on John extended to nearly 3 minutes, representing an unusually prolonged engagement that suggested either exceptional predatory focus or possible confusion about appropriate prey handling techniques. Most grizzly bear attacks on humans lasted less than 30 seconds, with the bears typically withdrawing once they determined the human threat had been neutralized. The extended duration of this attack suggested the bear was treating the encounter as a hunting situation rather than a defensive response, behavior that wildlife experts would later recognize as extremely unusual and problematic. Mark's ability to remain conscious and mobile during the extended attack on John provided him with opportunities to potentially intervene or escape, though his injuries and psychological shock severely limited his tactical options. His observation of the attack's progression allowed him to recognize when individual Alpha 7's attention was completely focused on John, creating brief windows where flight might have been possible if he had possessed the presence of mind and physical capability to take advantage of them. The tactical opportunities existed but remained unexploited due to the overwhelming nature of the situation and Mark's inexperience with combat decision-making. The sound of John's defensive struggle with individual Alpha 7 created an acoustic signature that wildlife researchers would later recognize as characteristic of predatory attacks rather than defensive encounters. The pattern of vocalizations, including both human and bear sounds, provided diagnostic information about attack intensity and progression that experienced outdoorsmen could interpret to understand the nature and severity of the ongoing emergency. Rebecca Santos recognized these acoustic patterns from her wildlife photography work and immediately escalated her emergency response efforts to include helicopter evacuation requests rather than ground-based rescue operations. Individual Alpha 7's behavioral patterns during the attack demonstrated several characteristics that wildlife management officials would later identify as problematic indicators of habituation to human contact and possible previous negative encounters with people. The bear's systematic approach, tactical sophistication, and extended engagement duration all suggested learned behaviors that had been reinforced through successful predatory experiences. These behavioral patterns indicated the bear represented an ongoing threat to human safety that would require management intervention to prevent additional attacks in the future. John's defensive capabilities began deteriorating significantly during the second minute of his engagement with individual Alpha 7, as blood loss and shock began affecting his motor control and decision-making abilities. His initial tactical responses had been based on military training and wilderness experience, but the sustained nature of the attack exceeded any scenario for which he had been prepared. The progressive degradation of his defensive effectiveness created a positive feedback loop where his reduced capability made him increasingly vulnerable to continued attack, accelerating the rate of injury accumulation. Mark's desperate attempts to attract attention and summon help included vocalizations that carried for significant distances through the river valley, though the remote location and limited human activity in the area made immediate rescue response unlikely. His calls for help were heard by Rebecca Santos and potentially by other outdoor enthusiasts in the vicinity, though the time required for emergency response personnel to reach their location would exceed any reasonable expectation for survival of the ongoing attack. The emergency communication efforts represented necessary actions despite their minimal probability of affecting the immediate tactical situation. The river's proximity to the attack location created additional tactical complications, as individual Alpha 7's positioning prevented the brothers from using the water as either an escape route or a defensive barrier. Grizzly bears were excellent swimmers, and the river's depth and current characteristics wouldn't have provided significant obstacles to continued pursuit if either brother had managed to reach the water. The river's presence actually worked to the bear's tactical advantage by limiting human escape options while providing the bear with familiar terrain where its superior physical capabilities could be most effectively employed. Individual Alpha 7's attack behavior during the final phase of its engagement with John demonstrated the kind of systematic prey handling techniques that grizzly bears employed when dealing with large ungulate species such as moose or elk. The bear's methods suggested it was treating John as prey rather than as a territorial threat, behavior that wildlife experts would later recognize as extremely unusual for grizzly bear-human encounters in Alaska. The predatory treatment indicated possible previous experience with human prey or exceptional individual behavioral development that differed significantly from typical grizzly bear response patterns. John's final defensive efforts focused on protecting his vital organs and maintaining consciousness long enough to potentially provide Mark with escape opportunities, demonstrating family loyalty and tactical awareness despite overwhelming personal danger. His commercial fishing background had taught him that survival in extreme situations often required accepting personal risk to protect others, experience that proved directly applicable to their current crisis. John's willingness to sacrifice himself for his brother's potential survival represented both tactical decision-making and deep emotional bonds that had developed despite their years of geographical separation. The conclusion of individual Alpha 7's attack on John occurred when the bear apparently determined that the human threat had been adequately neutralized, though wildlife experts would debate whether this represented tactical decision-making or simple loss of interest in prey that no longer provided stimulating resistance. The bear's withdrawal from John's position didn't indicate the end of the encounter, as individual Alpha 7 immediately redirected its attention toward Mark's location with what appeared to be renewed predatory focus. The tactical situation shifted from a two-target engagement to concentrated attention on a single, already injured opponent. Mark's attempts to aid John during the final phase of the attack were prevented by his own injuries and the bear's positioning, which maintained tactical control over the entire encounter area. His inability to provide effective assistance to his brother created psychological trauma that extended beyond the immediate physical danger, establishing patterns of guilt and helplessness that would require extensive therapy to resolve. The experience of watching John's defensive struggle while being unable to intervene effectively created lasting mental health impacts that proved more persistent than his physical injuries. Individual Alpha 7's transition from attacking John to focusing on Mark demonstrated remarkable tactical continuity and situational awareness, suggesting cognitive abilities that exceeded typical grizzly bear behavior patterns. The bear's ability to manage sequential engagements with multiple opponents while maintaining control over terrain and tactical positioning indicated either exceptional individual intelligence or learned behaviors that had been developed through previous combat experience. The bear's tactical sophistication created a situation where traditional wilderness safety protocols provided minimal protection against such an exceptional predator. Mark's positioning during the bear's renewed approach provided him with better visibility of potential escape routes than had been available during the initial attack phase, though his injuries significantly limited his mobility options. His assessment of the tactical situation suggested that flight remained his only viable survival strategy, despite the bear's superior speed and his own reduced physical capability. The decision of whether to attempt escape or remain stationary represented a critical tactical choice that would determine his survival chances during the encounter's final phase. The approach of individual Alpha 7 toward Mark's position demonstrated the same systematic evaluation behavior that had characterized the bear's initial investigation of the brothers' location, suggesting the bear was conducting tactical assessment rather than simply attacking out of aggression or defensive instinct. The bear's methodical approach provided Mark with time to consider his options and potentially implement defensive or escape strategies. Though his inexperience with combat situations and his current injury status severely limited his tactical capabilities, the time available for decision-making represented both an opportunity and a psychological burden that added stress to an already overwhelming situation. Rebecca Santos arrived at a position approximately 200 yards from the attack location, just as individual Alpha 7 was beginning its final approach toward Mark's position, providing her with clear visual contact with the ongoing emergency. Her telephoto photography equipment allowed her to document the encounter from a safe distance, while simultaneously providing accurate information to emergency response personnel about the situation's severity and specific location coordinates. Rebecca's presence represented the first external witness to the attack and the beginning of organized rescue response efforts. Dr. Kowalski's helicopter survey team received Rebecca's emergency communication while conducting wildlife monitoring activities approximately 15 miles from the attack location, immediately redirecting their flight path to provide emergency response support. The helicopter's capabilities included medical evacuation equipment and communication systems that could coordinate with ground-based rescue operations, though the response time would still exceed any reasonable expectation for intervention during the active attack phase. The helicopter's approach would represent the first professional rescue capability to reach the scene, though its arrival would occur after the critical tactical phase had concluded. Mark's final defensive strategy involved attempting to reach the river despite individual Alpha 7's positioning between his location and the water, representing a desperate tactical gambit that offered minimal probability of success, but remained his only viable option for survival. His movement toward the water triggered the bear's pursuit instincts while simultaneously creating the kind of dynamic tactical situation where unpredictable factors might influence the outcome. The decision to attempt escape rather than remain defensive represented Mark's assessment that passive resistance offered no survival potential against such an overwhelming predator. Individual Alpha 7's pursuit of Mark toward the river demonstrated the explosive acceleration and agility that made grizzly bears virtually impossible to evade through flight once they committed to chase behavior. The bear's tactical positioning during the pursuit showed sophisticated understanding of terrain features and human movement limitations, effectively herding Mark toward areas where capture would be most easily accomplished. The bear's hunting techniques during the pursuit phase represented textbook predatory behavior that wildlife experts recognized as characteristic of successful, large predator hunting strategies. The final physical contact between individual Alpha 7 and Mark occurred at the river's edge, where the bear's superior reach and speed allowed it to intercept Mark's escape attempt, despite his head start and motivation. The tackle that brought Mark down demonstrated the overwhelming physical power differential that made human resistance virtually futile against such a massive and well-equipped predator. Mark's impact with the ground created additional injuries that complicated his existing trauma, while simultaneously positioning him for the kind of systematic attack that the bear had previously employed against John. Individual Alpha 7's attack on Mark at the river's edge lasted approximately 45 seconds and focused primarily on the kind of systematic mauling behavior that grizzly bears used to quickly disable prey species. The bear's tactical approach demonstrated learned efficiency in dealing with human opponents, suggesting either previous experience or exceptional individual behavioral development that allowed it to quickly neutralize resistance while minimizing its own risk of injury. The attack's duration and intensity created life-threatening injuries that would require immediate medical intervention to prevent death from blood loss or shock. Mark's defensive responses during individual Alpha 7's final attack were hampered by his previous injuries, shock, and inexperience with life-or-death combat situations, though his urban background's physical fitness provided some protection against the most immediately life-threatening aspects of the bear's assault. His attempts to protect vital organs and maintain consciousness demonstrated instinctive survival responses despite his lack of wilderness combat training. The effectiveness of his defensive posturing was limited by the overwhelming nature of his opponent, though it may have prevented immediately fatal injuries that would have precluded any possibility of survival. The sound of Mark's distress during individual Alpha 7's final attack provided Rebecca Santos with clear indication that the emergency had escalated to life-threatening intensity, prompting her to implement maximum priority rescue communication protocols while maintaining visual observation of the situation's development. Her photography equipment continued recording the encounter, providing documentation that would later prove crucial for understanding the attack's progression and the bear's behavioral patterns. Rebecca's witness testimony would become a critical component of both the emergency response efforts and the subsequent investigation. Individual Alpha 7's withdrawal from the attack scene occurred abruptly and without apparent provocation, suggesting either satisfaction with the level of prey disabling it had accomplished or distraction by environmental factors that redirected its attention away from continued predatory behavior. The bear's departure created the first tactical opportunity for rescue operations since the encounter had begun, though both brothers' condition required immediate medical intervention that exceeded the capabilities of any resources currently available at the scene. The bear's withdrawal pattern suggested it remained in the immediate vicinity rather than leaving the area entirely. Dr. Kowalski's helicopter survey team arrived at the attack scene approximately 8 minutes after individual Alpha 7's withdrawal, providing the first professional rescue capabilities and medical assessment of the brothers' conditions. The helicopter crew included emergency medical technicians trained in wilderness trauma response, though the severity of injuries present exceeded their immediate treatment capabilities and required helicopter evacuation to definitive medical care facilities. The crew's initial assessment suggested both brothers had sustained life-threatening injuries that would require immediate surgical intervention to prevent death from blood loss, shock, or internal organ damage. Rebecca Santos's approach to the attack scene was coordinated with the helicopter crew's tactical assessment to ensure her safety, while providing ground-based assistance with patient preparation and evacuation logistics. Her wilderness first aid training proved valuable in stabilizing both brothers for helicopter transport, though the extent of their injuries exceeded any field treatment capabilities and required immediate evacuation to trauma center facilities. Rebecca's photographic documentation of the attack scene provided crucial evidence for subsequent wildlife management and legal investigations. The helicopter evacuation of both Miller brothers required sophisticated medical life support systems and coordination with trauma center personnel to ensure their survival during the flight to definitive care facilities. John's condition was assessed as critical with life-threatening injuries requiring immediate surgical intervention, while Mark's injuries were severe but potentially survivable with appropriate medical treatment. The flight time to Providence, Alaska Medical Center in Anchorage created additional challenges for maintaining patient stability during transport, though the helicopter crew's medical capabilities provided essential life support during the critical evacuation period. Individual Alpha 7's behavior following the attack demonstrated continued territorial presence in the area, with wildlife tracking equipment documenting the bear's movements throughout the immediate vicinity for several hours after the encounter. The bear's post-attack behavior patterns suggested it was monitoring rescue operations while maintaining access to the area where the encounter had occurred, behavior that wildlife management officials recognized as problematic and indicative of ongoing threat potential. The bear's continued presence necessitated enhanced security protocols for rescue operations and subsequent investigation activities. Thomas Hartley's Guide Service was among the first civilian organizations to respond to emergency communications about the attack, providing ground-based support for rescue operations and local area expertise that proved valuable for coordinating helicopter landing sites and evacuation logistics. Tom's knowledge of local bear behavior patterns and terrain features allowed him to provide tactical advice to rescue personnel about safety protocols and potential risks associated with individual Alpha 7's continued presence in the area. His involvement represented the beginning of civilian community response to the emergency. Dr. Kowalski's immediate assessment of individual Alpha 7's behavior patterns during and after the attack suggested the bear represented an exceptional case, requiring immediate wildlife management intervention to prevent additional human casualties. The bear's predatory behavior, tactical sophistication, and continued territorial presence in the attack area indicated behavioral patterns that differed significantly from typical grizzly bear-human encounter scenarios. Her preliminary recommendations included immediate area closure to human activity and implementation of enhanced monitoring protocols to track the bear's movements and assess ongoing threat potential. The emergency room team at Providence, Alaska Medical Center began receiving trauma alerts about the incoming helicopter evacuation approximately 20 minutes before the aircraft's arrival, allowing them to prepare surgical teams and specialized equipment needed for treating severe wildlife attack injuries. The medical center's experience with Alaska's unique trauma patterns included protocols specifically designed for bear attack victims, though the severity of the Miller brothers' injuries challenged even their specialized treatment capabilities. The trauma team's preparation represented the beginning of the medical response phase that would determine both brothers' survival chances. John Miller's medical condition upon arrival at Providence, Alaska Medical Center was assessed as critical, with life-threatening injuries including severe blood loss, multiple fractures, internal organ damage, and traumatic brain injury that required immediate surgical intervention by multiple specialist teams working simultaneously. His injuries represented some of the most severe bear attack trauma the medical center had encountered, requiring innovative treatment approaches and maximum utilization of available medical resources. The surgical team's initial assessment suggested his survival would depend on successful management of multiple life-threatening complications during the first 24 hours of treatment. Mark Miller's medical assessment revealed severe but potentially survivable injuries, including multiple lacerations, fractures, and soft tissue damage that required extensive surgical repair but didn't immediately threaten his life if properly treated. His psychological condition showed signs of severe trauma that would require specialized mental health intervention in addition to physical medical treatment, creating a complex care situation that challenged the hospital's integrated treatment capabilities. Mark's conscious state during initial treatment allowed him to provide crucial information about the attack's progression and his brother's condition that proved valuable for both medical and investigative purposes. The surgical teams treating both Miller brothers worked throughout the night of July 8th and into the morning of July 9th, employing specialized techniques developed for treating complex trauma cases while maintaining communication with family members and law enforcement officials investigating the attack. John's surgical treatment required multiple procedures to address life-threatening complications, while Mark's treatment focused on extensive wound repair and preventing infection in his numerous lacerations. The medical response represented a coordinated effort involving dozens of medical professionals and significant hospital resources dedicated to saving both brothers' lives. Sarah Miller received notification of the attack through Alaska State Trooper emergency communication protocols approximately 4 hours after the initial encounter, beginning a family crisis response that would test her emotional resilience and practical decision-making capabilities during one of the most challenging situations imaginable. Her immediate priorities included traveling to Anchorage to be with her husband and brother-in-law, while simultaneously coordinating with other family members and managing the practical details associated with a major medical emergency in Alaska's challenging logistical environment. The Alaska State Troopers' initial investigation of the bear attack scene began on the morning of July 9th, coordinated with wildlife management officials and utilizing specialized forensic techniques designed for wildlife encounter crime scenes. The investigation required documenting physical evidence, interviewing witnesses, and assessing the attack location while maintaining safety protocols necessary for operating in an area where a dangerous predator remained active. The investigation represented the beginning of official efforts to understand the attack's circumstances and determine appropriate legal and administrative responses. Dr. Kowalski's expanded wildlife management response included immediate deployment of additional monitoring resources to track individual Alpha 7's movements and behavior patterns following the attack, recognizing that the bear's demonstrated predatory behavior toward humans represented an exceptional public safety threat. The monitoring efforts utilized GPS tracking collars, trail cameras, and human observation teams to maintain continuous surveillance of the bear's location and activities. The wildlife management response represented unprecedented resources dedicated to monitoring a single problem bear due to the exceptional nature of its behavior. Rebecca Santos's photographic documentation of the bear attack became crucial evidence in both the criminal investigation and wildlife management response, providing detailed visual records of individual Alpha 7's behavior patterns and the attack's progression that weren't available from any other source. Her images allowed wildlife experts to analyze the bear's tactical approaches and behavioral characteristics that contributed to the attack's severity and unusual nature. Rebecca's professional documentation represented the most comprehensive visual record of a grizzly bear attack ever captured, providing unprecedented insight into predatory bear behavior. The media response to news of the bear attack began developing within hours of the initial emergency communications, as Alaska's outdoor recreation community and wildlife management organizations recognized the exceptional nature of the encounter and its implications for public safety policies. Initial news coverage focused on the attack's severity and the ongoing condition of both victims, though subsequent reporting would expand to include broader questions about wildlife management practices and recreational safety protocols in Alaska's wilderness areas. Thomas Hartley coordinated with Alaska State Troopers and wildlife management officials to provide area access and logistical support for the ongoing investigation and monitoring efforts, utilizing his guide services equipment and local knowledge to facilitate official response activities. His involvement represented the civilian outdoor recreation community's contribution to understanding and responding to the attack, providing practical expertise that complemented official agency capabilities. Tom's participation demonstrated the collaborative approach necessary for managing complex wilderness emergency situations in Alaska. The closure of the Murphy's Bend area to recreational access was implemented immediately following the attack, creating a controlled environment where wildlife management officials could monitor individual Alpha 7's behavior without risking additional human casualties. The closure area extended for several miles along the Kenai River corridor, affecting numerous recreational users and commercial guide operations that relied on the area for their summer business activities. The closure represented a significant economic and recreational impact that demonstrated the serious nature of the threat posed by the problematic bear. Individual Alpha 7's tracking data from the days following the attack revealed continued territorial behavior in the immediate vicinity of the encounter location, with the bear showing persistent interest in areas where human scent remained detectable. The bear's behavior patterns suggested possible association between human presence and food availability that had been reinforced through the attack encounter, creating learned behaviors that wildlife management officials recognized as extremely problematic. The tracking data provided crucial information for assessing the bear's ongoing threat potential and developing appropriate management strategies. John Miller's medical condition during the first week following the attack required intensive care management and multiple surgical procedures to address complications arising from his extensive injuries, with his survival remaining uncertain despite maximum medical intervention. His medical team's efforts focused on managing life-threatening complications while simultaneously working to preserve long-term function and quality of life, if he survived the acute phase of his injuries. John's treatment represented one of the most challenging bear attack cases the medical center had encountered, requiring innovative approaches and exceptional resource dedication. Mark Miller's physical recovery proceeded more predictably than his brother's critical condition, though his psychological trauma proved more complex and persistent than initially anticipated by the mental health treatment team. His conscious memory of the attack's progression and his observation of John's injuries created lasting psychological impacts that required specialized trauma therapy techniques designed for extreme survival experiences. Mark's recovery process would become a case study in treating complex psychological trauma associated with wildlife attack survival. The investigation into individual Alpha-7's behavioral history revealed previous incidents of unusual aggression and human habituation that had been documented but not adequately addressed by wildlife management protocols, suggesting systemic issues with problem bear identification and response procedures. The bear's documented behavior patterns indicated a progression of increasingly problematic interactions with human activity that had culminated in predatory behavior toward the Miller brothers. The investigation findings would influence significant changes in Alaska's wildlife management policies and procedures. Dr. Kowalski's analysis of individual Alpha-7's behavior patterns during the attack identified several characteristics that differed significantly from typical grizzly bear-human encounter scenarios, including predatory rather than defensive motivation, tactical sophistication in managing multiple opponents, and extended engagement duration that suggested learned hunting behaviors. Her findings contributed to scientific understanding of anomalous bear behavior while simultaneously informing practical management decisions about the ongoing threat posed by this particular animal. The family impact of the bear attack extended beyond the immediate victims to include Sarah Miller's emotional and practical challenges in managing a complex medical crisis while maintaining hope for her husband's recovery and supporting Mark through his physical and psychological recovery process. Sarah's experience represented the hidden casualties of wilderness emergencies that affected entire family systems and required comprehensive support services. Her strength during the crisis became a crucial factor in both brothers' recovery processes. The legal implications of the bear attack included potential liability issues for land management agencies, guide services, and recreational permit systems that had allowed the brothers to camp in an area where problematic bear behavior had been previously documented but not adequately disclosed to recreational users. The legal analysis required examining the balance between public access to wilderness areas and public safety obligations when dangerous wildlife conditions were known to exist. The legal proceedings would establish important precedents for wilderness recreation liability and safety disclosure requirements. Rebecca Santos's career as a wildlife photographer was significantly impacted by her documentation of the bear attack, with her images becoming internationally recognized symbols of the intersection between human recreation and wildlife habitat that characterized modern outdoor recreation challenges. Her professional development included increased focus on wildlife safety education and advocacy for improved wilderness safety protocols based on her first-hand observation of the attack's progression and aftermath. The Alaska State Troopers' final investigation report documented the attack as an exceptional case of predatory bear behavior that represented a statistical anomaly in grizzly bear-human encounter patterns, though it also identified systemic issues with problem bear monitoring and recreational area safety protocols that contributed to the encounter's occurrence. The report's recommendations influenced significant policy changes in Alaska's wildlife management and recreational safety systems. Individual Alpha 7's ultimate fate was determined through a collaborative decision-making process involving wildlife management officials, public safety authorities, and scientific advisors, who concluded that the bear's demonstrated predatory behavior toward humans represented an unacceptable ongoing threat that required lethal management intervention. The decision reflected the exceptional nature of the bear's behavior and the impossibility of modifying learned predatory responses through non-lethal management techniques. The scientific analysis of individual Alpha 7's behavior contributed to research on anomalous grizzly bear behavior patterns and their implications for wildlife management policy, with the case becoming a reference point for understanding how individual bears could develop behavioral patterns that differed dramatically from species' typical responses to human encounters. The research findings influenced bear safety education programs and wildlife management training protocols throughout North America. John Miller's long-term recovery process extended over multiple years and required extensive reconstructive surgery, physical rehabilitation, and psychological counseling to address both his physical injuries and the emotional trauma associated with his survival of such an extreme encounter. His recovery became an inspiration for other wildlife attack survivors, while simultaneously highlighting the long-term impacts that such encounters could have on victims and their families. John's experience contributed to improved treatment protocols for complex wildlife attack trauma. Mark Miller's psychological recovery involved processing not only his own trauma, but also the complex emotions associated with his survival, while his brother faced life-threatening injuries, creating survivor guilt that required specialized therapeutic intervention. His healing process included becoming an advocate for wilderness safety education and sharing his experience to help other outdoor enthusiasts understand the importance of proper safety protocols when recreating in bear habitat. The broader implications of the Miller brothers' bear attack included significant changes in Alaska's wilderness recreation safety policies, enhanced problem bear monitoring systems, and improved public education about the risks associated with outdoor recreation in areas with large predator populations. The attack served as a catalyst for systematic improvements in wilderness safety infrastructure that benefited countless future recreational users. The memorial established for the Miller brothers' experience became a focal point for wilderness safety education and a reminder of both the beauty and the dangers inherent in Alaska's magnificent wilderness areas, ensuring that their experience would contribute to preventing similar tragedies while preserving public access to the natural areas that defined Alaska's recreational opportunities and cultural identity. The next stories: Grizzly Bear Mauls, 22-year-old TikToker filming video. May 9th, 2024. The morning mist clung to the granite faces of Yosemite's towering monoliths like ghostly fingers, reluctant to surrender to the advancing daylight. At 5:47 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on May 9, 2024, the temperature hovered at a crisp 42 degrees Fahrenheit as dawn painted the eastern rim of the valley in shades of amber and gold. The Merced River murmured its ancient song through the meadows below, its waters swollen with late spring snowmelt from the high country, carrying with it the mineral scent of granite and the sweet decay of last autumn's leaves finally emerging from their winter burial beneath the retreating snow. Chloe Isabella Ramirez had been awake since 4:15 a.m., her internal clock calibrated not by the natural rhythms of the wilderness, but by the algorithmic demands of social media engagement. At 22 years old, she had already amassed 2.4 million followers across her various platforms. Her Chloe's Wild Adventures handle commanding six-figure sponsorship deals and brand partnerships that funded her increasingly ambitious content creation expeditions. Born and raised in the sun-baked suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, Chloe had discovered her calling not in the traditional career paths her parents had envisioned. Her father, Miguel, worked as a software engineer for a defense contractor. Her mother, Elena, taught third grade at a predominantly Hispanic elementary school. But in the dopamine-driven world of viral content creation, standing 5 feet 6 inches tall, with naturally dark brown hair she'd recently highlighted with streaks of copper that caught the light during her outdoor shoots, Chloe possessed the kind of effortless photogenic quality that translated perfectly to the small screens of smartphones. Her olive complexion, inherited from her Mexican grandmother Rosa, gave her an exotic appeal that played well with her predominantly white, suburban female audience aged 16 to 34. But it was her personality, a carefully crafted blend of relatable vulnerability and fearless adventure-seeking, that had truly set her apart in the oversaturated landscape of lifestyle influencers. This particular expedition to Yosemite National Park represented the culmination of months of planning and negotiation. Chloe's management team at Stellar Digital, headed by her agent Marcus Chen, had secured the necessary permits for commercial filming in the park through a labyrinthine process involving the National Park Service, California state authorities, and no fewer than 7 different liability insurance policies. The budget for this 3-week content creation blitz totaled nearly $85,000, funded by a combination of brand sponsorships from outdoor gear companies, energy drink manufacturers, and a major streaming service that had been courting Chloe for a potential wilderness survival reality show. The base camp Chloe had established sat in the Bridal Veil Creek area, approximately 2.5 miles southeast of Glacier Point Road, at an elevation of 7,200 feet above sea level. The location had been selected not for its relative safety or proximity to park services, but for its dramatic backdrop potential and the way the morning light would illuminate Half Dome in the distance. Her camp consisted of a $3,200 four-season mountaineering tent from Arc'teryx, a portable weather station that transmitted real-time conditions to her phone, and enough high-end camping equipment to outfit a small expedition to Everest Base Camp. Accompanying Chloe on this venture was her boyfriend of 8 months, Tyler James Morrison, a 25-year-old former college football player turned personal trainer from Scottsdale, who had leveraged his relationship with Chloe into his own modest social media following. Tyler stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, his broad shoulders and defined musculature the product of years of disciplined training that had begun in high school when he'd harbored dreams of playing Division I football. Those dreams had died along with his right knee during his sophomore year at Arizona State University, torn apart in a collision during practice that had required 3 surgeries and 18 months of rehabilitation. The settlement from the university's insurance company had provided him with enough money to open a small gym and pursue his current career path. But the psychological scars from his derailed athletic ambitions still manifested in periods of brooding silence and an occasionally reckless need to prove his physical capabilities. Tyler's role in Chloe's content creation was supposedly that of the supportive boyfriend, the strong masculine presence who provided both eye candy for her female viewers and a sense of safety that allowed her to undertake increasingly dangerous stunts. In reality, Tyler often felt like little more than a prop in Chloe's carefully choreographed performances, his own personality subsumed by the demands of her brand. The tension this created in their relationship had been building for months, exacerbated by Tyler's growing awareness that many of Chloe's most popular posts featured her alone, and that the algorithm seemed to favor content where she appeared single and available rather than committed to a relationship. The third member of their party was David Kim, a 28-year-old freelance videographer and drone operator from Los Angeles, whom Chloe had hired for $12,000 to capture professional-grade footage of her Yosemite adventure. David had graduated from USC's film school with $180,000 in student debt and had spent the past 5 years grinding through low-paying production assistant jobs before finally breaking into the lucrative but unstable world of social media content creation. He was thin and angular, with the pale complexion of someone who spent most of his time indoors, hunched over editing software, his dark hair perpetually disheveled and his thick-framed glasses constantly slipping down his narrow nose. David's equipment represented nearly 2 years' worth of his income: a red Komodo 6K camera system, 3 different drone platforms including a custom-modified DJI Inspire 2, a full lighting kit adapted for battery operation, and enough spare batteries and memory cards to capture hundreds of hours of footage. He'd been specifically chosen for this project because of his reputation for getting shots that other videographers wouldn't attempt, often placing himself and his equipment in precarious positions to achieve the perfect angle. His Instagram portfolio showcased work for various lifestyle and adventure influencers, each project pushing the boundaries a little further in the endless quest for content that would stand out in an increasingly crowded digital landscape. The fourth member of their expedition was supposed to have been Jessica Chen, Chloe's longtime friend and occasional collaborator, a 23-year-old pre-med student at UCLA who had been featured in several of Chloe's previous adventure videos. Jessica had cancelled 3 days before their departure, citing an unexpected organic chemistry exam. But the real reason was her growing discomfort with the increasingly dangerous nature of Chloe's content. Jessica had been present during a close call in Joshua Tree National Park 6 months earlier, when Chloe had attempted to free climb a formation beyond her skill level and had nearly fallen 40 feet onto granite boulders. The incident had never made it into any published content. Chloe had deleted the footage and sworn everyone to secrecy, but it had shaken Jessica enough that she'd begun declining invitations to future expeditions. The decision to proceed with only 3 people instead of 4 would later be identified by multiple investigators as the first in a series of critical errors that contributed to the tragic events of May 9th. National Park Service guidelines strongly recommended minimum party sizes of 4 for backcountry camping, and the reduction in group size had cascading effects on their safety protocols, watch schedules, and emergency response capabilities. Chloe's morning routine on May 9th began with her standard wake-up ritual, checking her phone for overnight engagement on her previous day's posts, reviewing her shooting schedule, and consuming a breakfast of instant oatmeal supplemented with protein powder and dried fruit, while the portable espresso maker Tyler had insisted on bringing heated water for her morning coffee. The contrast between her carefully curated online persona and these mundane morning realities was stark. Her millions of followers saw only the highlight reel, the dramatic sunrises, the fearless cliff-edge poses, the inspirational quotes overlaid on breathtaking landscapes. They didn't see the anxiety that kept her checking and rechecking her posting schedule, the way she meticulously calculated the optimal timing for maximum engagement, or the growing pressure she felt to constantly escalate the danger level of her content to maintain her audience's attention. At 6:23 a.m., Chloe began her morning live stream, a daily ritual that had become one of her most popular features. "Good morning, beautiful adventurers," she chirped into her phone's front-facing camera, the enthusiastic tone requiring conscious effort given the early hour and the fact that she hadn't yet applied her carefully practiced outdoor makeup look. "Day 12 in gorgeous Yosemite, and I have something absolutely incredible planned for you today." The viewer count climbed steadily as her audience woke up on the East Coast, Early risers on the West Coast and international followers tuned in. Comments began flooding the screen. Heart emojis, questions about her location, requests for Tyler to make an appearance. Tyler, meanwhile, was conducting his own morning routine 30 feet away, a series of bodyweight exercises and stretches designed to maintain his physique during their extended camping trip. His relationship with Chloe's online presence was complicated by his own struggles with body image and relevance. Comments on videos that featured him inevitably included comparisons to other fitness influencers, speculation about their relationship status, and increasingly frequent suggestions that Chloe would be better off as a solo creator. These digital provocations stung more than Tyler cared to admit, triggering the same insecurities that had plagued him since his football career ended. David was already at work by 6:30 a.m., conducting his daily equipment check and reviewing the shot list Chloe had sent him the night before via encrypted message to prevent any accidental leaks of their planned content. Today's schedule was ambitious even by their standards, a sunrise time-lapse from Glacier Point, followed by what Chloe was calling breakfast with bears at a meadow location where park rangers had reported increased grizzly activity over the past 2 weeks. The bear encounter concept had emerged from Chloe's analysis of her most successful recent content, which showed that videos featuring potentially dangerous wildlife received engagement rates nearly 300% higher than her standard adventure content. The idea terrified David, but his financial situation left him little room for ethical objections. His younger sister was starting her junior year at Northwestern University, and his parents, both immigrants from South Korea who had sacrificed enormously to give their children educational opportunities, had exhausted their savings covering her tuition. David's contribution of $2,000 per month toward her expenses was contingent on maintaining his income from projects like this one. The moral complexity of creating content that potentially endangered both the creator and the wildlife was something he tried not to think about too deeply. The meteorological conditions on the morning of May 9th were what the National Weather Service would later describe as unseasonably volatile. A high-pressure system that had dominated California's weather patterns for the previous week was beginning to break down, allowing a series of low-pressure disturbances to move in from the Pacific Ocean. The result was a rapidly changing atmospheric situation characterized by sudden temperature swings, shifting wind patterns, and the potential for severe thunderstorm development later in the day. The park's automated weather stations had recorded wind gusts up to 35 miles per hour during the night, and the barometric pressure had dropped nearly 2 inches of mercury since midnight. These changing conditions had a profound effect on the park's wildlife. Bears, in particular, are extremely sensitive to barometric pressure changes, which can affect their feeding patterns, territorial behavior, and stress levels. The specific area where Chloe planned to film had been experiencing increased bear activity, partly due to these atmospheric disturbances, though this information was contained in internal Park Service communications that were not readily available to the public. At 7:15 a.m., the trio broke camp and began the challenging hike toward their filming location, a meadow complex known locally as Bear Valley, though this name didn't appear on any official park maps. The area was accessible via a poorly maintained trail that branched off from the more established Pohono Trail, approximately 1.8 miles from the Glacier Point parking area. The trail descended through mixed conifer forest, dominated by ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, and incense cedar, with an understory of manzanita and mountain lilac that had begun its spring bloom, filling the morning air with a sweet, almost intoxicating fragrance. The hike required approximately 90 minutes of steady walking, with an elevation loss of 800 feet as they descended from the Glacier Point area toward the valley floor. Chloe documented their progress with a series of Instagram stories, each carefully composed to show the dramatic landscape while maintaining her position as the focal point of every shot. Her hiking outfit had been selected as much for its photogenic qualities as for its functionality. Form-fitting athletic leggings in a burgundy color that complemented the natural tones of the forest, a cropped long-sleeve shirt that revealed a carefully maintained strip of tanned midriff, and a wide-brimmed hat that created dramatic shadows across her face while protecting her skin from the increasingly intense morning sun. Tyler carried the bulk of their equipment, his large hiking pack laden with camera gear, emergency supplies, food and water for the day's shoot. The weight, nearly 60 pounds, was well within his capabilities, but the awkward distribution of the gear and the irregular trail surface made for challenging hiking conditions. He'd insisted on bringing emergency communication equipment, including a satellite messenger device and a portable emergency beacon, over Chloe's objections that the extra weight and bulk weren't worth the minimal safety benefits. This equipment would prove crucial to their survival in ways none of them could have anticipated. David struggled more with the hiking demands, his sedentary lifestyle and years spent hunched over computer screens having left him with poor cardiovascular conditioning and limited outdoor experience. He carried his camera equipment in a specialized hiking pack designed to protect delicate electronics, but even this lighter load left him breathing heavily as they navigated the steep, rocky sections of the trail. His role required him to frequently stop and set up shots, adding significantly to their travel time as he captured establishing shots of their journey for the final video edit. The forest around them was alive with the sounds and scents of late spring. Stella's jays called raucously from the canopy overhead, their bright blue plumage flashing through the green branches. Chipmunks chattered from rocky outcroppings, and the occasional glimpse of a mule deer watching them from the shadows added to the wilderness atmosphere that Chloe was eager to capture. The air carried the complex perfume of warming pine needles, wildflowers beginning their bloom cycle, and the rich, earthy smell of forest soil moistened by recent snowmelt. What they couldn't detect, but which would later be revealed through extensive forensic analysis of the scene, was the presence of a large adult male grizzly bear that had been foraging in the area for the past 4 days. The bear, later estimated to weigh approximately 650 pounds and stand nearly 8 feet tall when on his hind legs, had been displaced from his usual territory by logging operations on adjacent national forest lands. The disruption had forced him into unfamiliar terrain where his normal food sources were scarce, creating a dangerous combination of hunger, stress, and territorial confusion that made him far more aggressive than grizzlies typically are in encounters with humans. This particular bear, designated as Bear 274 by park biologists who had been tracking his movements via GPS collar for the past 2 years, had a history that made him especially dangerous. He had been orphaned as a cub when his mother was killed by a vehicle on Highway 120 and had been raised in captivity before being released back into the wild at age 2. The human contact during his formative period had reduced his natural fear of people, while his size and strength made him capable of inflicting devastating damage when threatened or agitated. Over the past month, Bear 274 had been involved in 3 separate incidents involving human food sources. He had destroyed a campsite at Tuolumne Meadows, broken into a storage container at a wilderness research station, and been spotted on 2 occasions in areas with high human traffic. Park rangers had been attempting to locate and relocate him to a more remote area, but his GPS collar had malfunctioned 6 days earlier, leaving wildlife officials without current location data on one of the most potentially dangerous animals in the park. At 8:47 a.m., Chloe, Tyler, and David reached the edge of Bear Valley, a roughly circular meadow approximately 300 yards in diameter, surrounded by dense forest and bisected by a small creek that meandered through the grass in lazy S-curves. The meadow sat in a natural depression, creating a bowl-like formation that trapped morning fog and created a microclimate several degrees cooler and more humid than the surrounding forest. Wildflowers dotted the grass in brilliant patches of color. Yellow glacier lilies, purple lupine, and bright red Indian paintbrush, creating a natural tapestry that looked almost too perfect to be real. The location was everything Chloe had hoped for from a visual perspective. The morning light filtered through the surrounding trees created dramatic shafts of illumination that would photograph beautifully, while the creek provided both visual interest and the gentle sound of moving water that would enhance the audio quality of her content. More importantly, from her perspective, the meadow showed clear signs of recent bear activity: claw marks on trees, overturned logs where bears had searched for grubs, and several large depressions in the soft earth that served as daybeds for resting animals. David immediately began setting up his equipment, positioning his primary camera on a carbon fiber tripod at the edge of the meadow where he could capture Chloe's activities while maintaining a clear escape route back to the tree line. He launched his drone for aerial establishing shots, the electric motors creating a high-pitched whine that seemed unnaturally loud in the peaceful meadow environment. The drone's camera captured stunning footage of the location. The meadow nestled like a green jewel in the surrounding forest, with the dramatic peaks of the Sierra Nevada visible in the distance through gaps in the canopy. Tyler established a perimeter check, walking the full circumference of the meadow while looking for signs of recent animal activity, potential hazards, and escape routes. His years of athletic training had given him excellent situational awareness, and he noted several concerning details that he shared with the others. The bear sign was not just recent, but very recent, with some tracks in the soft creek mud that couldn't have been more than a few hours old. Additionally, the usual small animal sounds that characterized healthy forest environments were notably absent, often an indication that a large predator was in the vicinity. Chloe, however, was focused entirely on the content creation opportunities the location provided. She began with a series of still photographs, using a professional DSLR camera to capture what she called hero shots that would anchor her various social media posts about the location. Her posing was practiced and efficient, moving through a series of expressions and positions designed to convey different moods: adventurous, contemplative, joyful, and what her audience had dubbed her wilderness goddess look, which involved a particular tilt of her head and a distant gaze that suggested deep connection with the natural world. At 9:23 a.m., Chloe began her planned livestream titled Breakfast with Bears, Live from Yosemite's Secret Meadow. The title was deliberately provocative, designed to maximize click-through rates and suggest a level of danger that would keep viewers engaged. She had no actual intention of getting close to any bears, planning instead to rely on editing and suggestive content to create the impression of a more dangerous encounter than she actually experienced. "Good morning, my beautiful adventure family," Chloe began, speaking directly into her phone's camera, while positioned in the center of the meadow with the dramatic forest backdrop behind her. "I'm coming to you live from one of the most incredible locations I've ever found, deep in the wilderness of Yosemite National Park." The viewer count climbed rapidly as her followers received push notifications about the live stream, and the comment section filled with excited messages and emoji reactions. Tyler remained at the tree line, monitoring their surroundings while simultaneously watching Chloe's stream on his own phone, to provide real-time feedback about audio quality and visual composition. David operated between the two, capturing high-quality video footage that would be used for the edited version of the content, while ensuring his drone maintained optimal positioning for aerial shots. The first 26 minutes of the live stream proceeded exactly as planned. Chloe demonstrated various wilderness skills, including fire starting, water purification, and plant identification, while maintaining a constant stream of engaging commentary designed to keep viewers watching. She answered questions from the comment section, gave shout-outs to top contributors, and promoted various sponsor products in a way that felt natural rather than overtly commercial. The viewer count peaked at nearly 47,000 concurrent watchers, numbers that would translate to significant revenue through the platform's monetization systems. At 9:49 a.m., Tyler noticed movement in the forest approximately 150 yards to the northwest of Chloe's position. Initially, he assumed it was a deer or possibly an elk, both common in the area, but the way the vegetation moved suggested something much larger. He raised his hand in a prearranged signal that meant Chloe should wrap up her current segment and prepare to move to a new location, but she was deeply engaged with her audience and didn't notice his warning. The movement in the forest continued, and Tyler began to make out the distinctive bulk and coloring that could only mean a large bear. His immediate instinct was to call out a warning, but years of experience with Chloe's content creation had trained him to be extremely careful about disrupting her streams, especially with an audience of this size watching live. Instead, he began moving slowly toward her position while trying to get her attention through increasingly urgent hand signals. At 9:51 a.m., Bear 274 emerged from the tree line into the meadow. The grizzly's appearance was shocking in its suddenness and the sheer physical presence he commanded. Standing nearly 4 feet at the shoulder while on all fours, his massive frame was covered in thick, grizzled brown fur that caught the morning sunlight and revealed subtle variations in color from golden highlights along his back to darker, almost black fur around his legs and belly. His head was enormous, broader than a basketball, and dominated by small, intelligent eyes that immediately fixed on the humans in his territory. Several viewers in Chloe's live stream noticed the bear before she did, flooding the comment section with warnings and panic messages. "Bear, behind you!" appeared dozens of times in rapid succession, followed by variations of the same warning in multiple languages as her international audience tried desperately to alert her to the danger. The comment scroll became a blur of concerned messages, but Chloe was focused on her presentation and didn't check the viewer feedback until it was too late. David, operating his camera from the tree line, had the clearest view of the bear's emergence and immediately began recording, his professional instincts overriding his terror as he realized he was documenting what could be a historic wildlife encounter. Through his camera's zoom lens, he could see details that terrified him. The bear's body language showed none of the casual indifference that characterized most human-bear encounters. Instead, the animal's posture was alert and focused, his ears forward and his massive head held high as he assessed the situation in his territory. Tyler, now moving more quickly toward Chloe's position, tried to balance the need to warn her with the equally important need to avoid sudden movements or loud sounds that might provoke the bear into aggressive action. His knowledge of bear safety protocols, learned during a wilderness first aid course he'd taken years earlier, told him that their best chance was to appear non-threatening while slowly backing away toward the tree line and their prepared escape routes. At 9:52 a.m., Chloe finally noticed the bear. Her reaction was captured in horrifying detail by multiple camera angles. David's professional equipment recorded her face as the realization struck, showing the progression from confusion to recognition to absolute terror in the space of less than 2 seconds. Her own live stream captured her reaction from her perspective, as her phone's front-facing camera recorded her expression, while the rear-facing camera briefly showed the bear before she instinctively turned the phone toward herself. "Oh my God," she whispered, the words barely audible but clearly captured by her phone's microphone and broadcast live to nearly 50,000 viewers. "There's a bear. There's actually a bear here." The comment section exploded into chaos as viewers realized this wasn't planned content, but a genuine emergency unfolding in real time. Bear 274's response to detecting the humans was immediate and decisive. Rather than fleeing, which would be typical behavior for most bears encountering humans, he began advancing into the meadow at a steady walk, his massive head swinging back and forth as he analyzed the threat and assessed his options. His body language displayed none of the submissive or avoidance behaviors that characterize most bear-human encounters. Instead, every aspect of his posture communicated territorial aggression and predatory interest. Tyler reached Chloe's position and grabbed her arm, trying to guide her toward the tree line while maintaining eye contact with the bear and avoiding any sudden movements. "Don't run," he said firmly, his voice controlled despite his racing heartbeat. "We're going to back away slowly. Keep the phone rolling if you can, but get ready to drop everything and climb if I say so." The decision to continue recording would be controversial in the aftermath of the attack, with critics arguing that prioritizing content over safety contributed to the tragic outcome. However, the footage proved invaluable for understanding the bear's behavior and the sequence of events, ultimately contributing to improved safety protocols and bear management practices throughout the national park system. David, meanwhile, faced an agonizing choice between continuing to document the encounter and abandoning his expensive equipment to assist his companions. His position at the tree line gave him the clearest escape route, but also placed him furthest from Chloe and Tyler if they needed help. He chose to continue recording while moving to a position where he might be able to provide assistance, his camera capturing stunning but terrifying footage of the enormous grizzly advancing across the meadow. At 9:53 a.m., Bear 274's behavior shifted dramatically. The change was subtle but unmistakable to anyone familiar with bear body language. His steady walk accelerated to a faster pace, not quite a charge but clearly purposeful movement toward the humans. His ears, which had been forward in an alert position, now flattened against his head, a clear sign of aggressive intent. Most ominously, he began making vocalizations, a series of low rumbles and huffing sounds that seemed to resonate through the meadow like distant thunder. Chloe's live stream captured her growing panic as she tried to maintain her composure for her audience while processing the reality of her situation. "Guys, this is really happening," she said into her phone's camera, her voice shaking despite her efforts to control it. "I'm looking at a massive grizzly bear right now, and I don't think he's going to leave us alone." The viewer count continued climbing as word spread across social media platforms about the live bear encounter, reaching over 70,000 concurrent viewers. Tyler's athletic background and competitive experience served him well in the crisis, allowing him to maintain focus and decision-making capability even as his body flooded with adrenaline. He assessed their options with the rapid calculation that had made him a successful athlete. The tree line was approximately 40 yards away, an easy sprint under normal circumstances, but potentially fatal if it triggered the bear's chase instinct. The creek offered no meaningful protection, being only 18 inches deep at its maximum point. Their only realistic option was to continue backing away while appearing non-threatening and hope the bear would lose interest. "Chloe, we need to make ourselves look bigger," Tyler instructed, raising his arms above his head while continuing to move backward. "Wave your arms, but do it slowly. And whatever you do, don't make eye contact with him." These instructions were based on standard bear safety protocols, though he was rapidly realizing that this encounter was far from standard. David's telephoto lens captured incredible detail of the bear's approach, footage that would later be analyzed by wildlife biologists around the world. The grizzly's massive paws, each larger than a dinner plate and equipped with claws over 4 inches long, left deep impressions in the soft meadow soil. His muscles rippled beneath his thick fur coat as he moved, displaying the incredible power that made grizzly bears one of North America's most formidable predators. At 9:54 a.m., the situation deteriorated catastrophically. Bear 274 transitioned from a purposeful walk to an unmistakable charge, his massive frame accelerating with shocking speed across the remaining distance of the meadow. Grizzly bears can reach speeds of up to 35 miles per hour, faster than any human can run, and the sight of 650 pounds of apex predator bearing down on them triggered every evolutionary alarm system in their bodies. Chloe screamed, the sound captured in crystal clarity by both her phone's microphone and David's professional audio equipment. The scream was primal and terrifying, expressing not just fear, but the sudden recognition of mortality that comes with facing a predator evolution has programmed humans to avoid. Her phone, still streaming live, bounced wildly as she instinctively turned to run, providing viewers with a chaotic but compelling perspective of the bear's charge. Tyler pushed Chloe toward the nearest climbable tree, a large ponderosa pine with branches low enough to potentially reach, while positioning himself between her and the charging bear. His football instincts kicked in as he prepared for impact, his body automatically assuming a defensive stance, even as his rational mind understood the futility of trying to tackle a grizzly bear. David abandoned his tripod-mounted camera and ran toward his companions, though he continued operating his handheld camera, capturing footage that would later be described by wildlife experts as some of the most dramatic bear attack video ever recorded. His audio equipment picked up every terrifying detail: the thunder of the bear's paws striking the ground, Tyler's shouted warnings, Chloe's continued screams, and underneath it all, the bear's huffing vocalizations that seemed to fill the entire meadow with menace. The livestream audience watched in horror as the attack unfolded in real time. The comment section became a stream of panicked messages urging them to climb trees, call for help, and play dead. Many viewers began calling emergency services, though most had no specific location information that would enable rescue personnel to locate the scene quickly. The live nature of the content created a sense of helplessness among the audience, who could only watch and hope as the situation spiraled toward inevitable tragedy. At 9:54:23 a.m., Bear 274 reached Tyler's position. The impact was captured from multiple angles, creating a horrifying record of the moment when 200 pounds of human athlete met 650 pounds of apex predator at full charge. Tyler's attempt to stand his ground lasted less than a second as the bear's massive shoulder struck him center mass, launching him backward with enough force to carry him nearly 10 feet through the air before he crashed into the rocky ground beside the creek. The bear's attack on Tyler was swift and devastating. Grizzly bears are equipped with several natural weapons that make them exceptionally dangerous. Their claws, capable of penetrating several inches into flesh and bone, their bite force, measured at over 1,200 pounds per square inch, and their incredible strength, sufficient to crush bones and tear limbs from bodies. Tyler experienced all of these in rapid succession as the bear mounted his prone form and began what can only be described as a mauling. Chloe's phone continued streaming throughout Tyler's attack, though the video became increasingly chaotic as she ran toward the promised safety of the tree line. The audio, however, remained clear and devastating. Tyler's screams mixed with the bear's growls and the wet, tearing sounds that viewers would later describe as the most disturbing audio they had ever heard. The live nature of the stream meant that these sounds were broadcast immediately to over 80,000 viewers, creating a traumatic experience that would require counseling for many of the audience members. David reached the tree line and managed to climb approximately 8 feet up a Douglas fir before the bear noticed his movement. His camera, still recording, captured the moment when Bear 274 looked up from Tyler's motionless form and fixed his attention on this new target. The bear's muzzle was stained with blood, and his small eyes showed the kind of focused aggression that wildlife experts would later identify as territorial dominance behavior rather than defensive action. At 9:55:17 a.m., Bear 274 began pursuing David. The bear's transition from one victim to another was captured in horrifying detail by the camera David had managed to secure in the tree branches above his position. The footage shows the massive predator raising his head from Tyler's body, blood dripping from his muzzle as he oriented on the movement and sounds coming from David's position. The bear's approach to the tree was different from his charge across the meadow, more methodical and purposeful, like a predator who had already secured one victim and was now systematically eliminating potential threats to his dominance of the territory. Grizzly bears are excellent climbers, despite their size, and David's 8-foot height advantage provided only temporary safety. The bear reached the base of the Douglas fir and immediately began climbing, his massive claws finding purchase in the thick bark, while his powerful limbs propelled his bulk upward with surprising speed and grace. David climbed higher, but the thin branches at the tree's crown couldn't support his weight, leaving him trapped approximately 20 feet above the ground, with a 650-pound predator ascending steadily toward his position. The footage from David's secured camera captured every terrifying moment of the bear's climb. Wildlife experts who later analyzed the video noted the casual efficiency of the bear's movements, suggesting that this was not defensive behavior but active predation. The bear showed no signs of stress or fear, instead displaying the confident aggression of an apex predator eliminating threats in his territory. Meanwhile, Chloe had reached her own tree, a massive ponderosa pine with a trunk diameter of nearly 4 feet and branches that began approximately 12 feet above the ground. Her smaller size and rock climbing experience, gained through months of training for her adventure content, allowed her to scale the trunk and reach the relative safety of the lower branches. Her phone, somehow still clutched in her hand, continued broadcasting the live stream as she climbed, providing viewers with a horrifying first-person perspective of the escape attempt. At 9:56:45 a.m., Bear 274 reached David's position in the tree. What followed was captured by multiple cameras, creating a record of a bear attack that wildlife experts would study for years. The bear's assault on David was more prolonged than his attack on Tyler, partly because of the challenging mechanics of attacking prey positioned in a tree, and partly because David's position allowed him to partially defend himself with kicks and defensive movements. The bear's claws, each over 4 inches long and sharp as razors, found their target repeatedly as he swiped at David's legs and torso. The wounds inflicted were immediately life-threatening. Deep lacerations that severed muscles, tendons, and blood vessels, causing massive hemorrhaging that stained the tree's bark and dripped steadily to the forest floor below. David's screams, captured by his own audio equipment, provided a horrifying soundtrack that would haunt viewers for years. Chloe, watching from her own tree approximately 40 yards away, continued streaming live as she witnessed David's mauling. Her audience, now exceeding 100,000 concurrent viewers as word spread across social media platforms, begged her in the comments to call for help, to do something, to end the stream. But Chloe seemed paralyzed by shock and terror, capable only of whispering a continuous stream of prayers and pleas that were barely audible over David's screams and the bear's growls. The live stream's technical quality remained surprisingly good throughout the attack, a testament to the robust cellular coverage in this part of Yosemite and the high-quality streaming equipment Chloe used for her content creation. This meant that every horrifying detail was broadcast in high definition to her massive audience, creating what media experts would later describe as a new form of trauma entertainment that raised serious questions about the ethics of live streaming dangerous activities. At 9:58:12 a.m., David fell from the tree. Whether he was pulled from his position by the bear's claws or lost his grip due to blood loss and shock, the result was the same: a 20-foot fall onto rocky ground that resulted in multiple fractures and internal injuries. The impact was captured by his own camera equipment, providing forensic investigators with precise documentation of the mechanics of his fall and the injuries he sustained. Bear 274's response to David's fall was immediate and savage. The bear descended from the tree with remarkable speed and resumed his attack on the now helpless victim. David's injuries from the fall had left him barely conscious, but the bear's continued mauling ensured that his suffering continued for several more agonizing minutes. Chloe's live stream captured her reaction to David's fall and the bear's renewed attack. Her screams mixed with those of her dying friend, creating an audio record that would be used in numerous academic studies of trauma and social media. The comment section had become a blur of emergency information, with viewers posting phone numbers for park services, local emergency responders, and even trying to coordinate their own rescue efforts. At 10:02:33 a.m., the live stream signal cut off abruptly. Technical analysis would later reveal that the signal loss was due to Chloe's phone battery dying rather than any deliberate action on her part. The timing of the battery failure, coming 47 seconds after David's fall as his screams reached their most agonizing peak, seemed almost merciful to viewers who had watched the entire horrifying sequence unfold. The sudden transition from live horror to a simple stream-ended message left over 120,000 viewers in shock, many of them unsure whether what they had witnessed was real or some kind of elaborate hoax. But the horror continued even without the live stream documentation. Bear 274, having eliminated what he perceived as the primary threats to his territory, began exhibiting behavior that wildlife experts would later classify as cache protection. Rather than leaving the scene after neutralizing the threats, the bear began dragging Tyler's body toward a dense thicket at the edge of the meadow, behavior consistent with a predator protecting his kill from scavengers. Chloe, still alive in her tree, but now without any means of communication, could only watch as the bear methodically moved both bodies to positions where he could guard them while resting. Her survival training, limited though it was, told her that her only chance was to remain in the tree until the bear left the area, but the animal showed no signs of departing. Instead, he settled into a daybed position approximately 30 yards from the bodies, clearly intending to remain in the meadow for an extended period. The first emergency response was triggered not by Chloe's live stream audience, but by Tyler's satellite emergency beacon, which had been activated automatically when the device detected the severe impact of the bear's initial charge. The beacon's GPS signal provided rescuers with precise coordinates, but also indicated that the emergency was occurring in an area requiring helicopter access and specialized wilderness rescue personnel. At 10:47 a.m., Yosemite National Park's Emergency Dispatch Center received the first of what would eventually be over 200 phone calls from viewers of Chloe's livestream. The calls came from across the United States and several international locations, as viewers who had witnessed the attack attempted to report the emergency to authorities. However, most callers could provide only vague location information based on Chloe's earlier descriptions of their hiking route, making it difficult for dispatchers to correlate the reports with Tyler's emergency beacon signal. Park Ranger Jennifer Martinez was the first responder assigned to investigate the emergency beacon activation. A 12-year veteran of the National Park Service with extensive wilderness rescue experience, Martinez had been stationed at Yosemite for 6 years and had responded to dozens of bear-related incidents, though none involving actual attacks. Her initial assessment of the situation, based solely on the emergency beacon data, suggested a possible hiking accident or medical emergency rather than a wildlife encounter. Martinez's approach to the scene was conducted according to standard wilderness rescue protocols, but these protocols had not been designed for active bear attack scenarios. She traveled alone, as was typical for initial emergency assessment, and carried standard rescue equipment rather than the specialized gear that would have been appropriate for a dangerous wildlife situation. Her radio communications with dispatch during the approach phase provided a detailed record of the rescue attempt, but also documented the series of procedural failures that complicated the response. At 11:23 a.m., Ranger Martinez reached the edge of Bear Valley and immediately recognized that she was dealing with a wildlife emergency of unprecedented severity. Her first radio transmission to dispatch was terse and professional. Dispatch, Ranger Martinez. I have eyes on a large grizzly bear in the meadow, and I can see what appears to be 2 human casualties. The bear is actively guarding the scene. I need immediate backup and wildlife specialists. The bear's reaction to Ranger Martinez's arrival was swift and aggressive. Bear 274 had been resting near his cached victims, but remained alert to his surroundings. The appearance of another human triggered his territorial defense behaviors, and he immediately moved to a position between Martinez and the bodies, clearly communicating his intention to defend his kills from this new threat. Martinez's training and experience allowed her to recognize the extreme danger of the situation immediately. Standard protocols for bear encounters involved making noise, appearing large, and backing away slowly while avoiding direct eye contact. However, the presence of human casualties complicated these protocols enormously, as retreat would mean abandoning potentially survivable victims to certain death. From her position in the tree, Chloe could see Ranger Martinez's arrival, but had no way to communicate her presence or condition. The ranger's focus was necessarily on the immediate threat posed by the bear and the visible casualties in the meadow, making it unlikely that she would notice a survivor concealed in the forest canopy 40 yards away. Chloe's survival now depended not just on avoiding the bear's attention, but on finding a way to alert rescuers to her location before they left the scene. At 11:31 a.m., the first helicopter arrived overhead, a Bell 407 operated by the California Highway Patrol and equipped for wilderness rescue operations. The helicopter's arrival triggered another dramatic change in Bear 274's behavior, as the noise and downwash from the rotor blades created a new threat that the bear perceived as an attack from above. Rather than fleeing, which would be typical bear behavior in response to aircraft, Bear 274 became increasingly agitated and aggressive, moving between his cached victims and roaring challenges at the hovering helicopter. The helicopter crew, consisting of pilot Captain Sandra Wei and flight paramedic Lieutenant Robert Chen, had extensive experience with wilderness rescue operations but had never encountered an active predation scenario. Their standard protocols called for landing near the victims and providing immediate medical attention, but the bear's aggressive behavior and proximity to the casualties made landing impossible without extreme risk to the rescue crew. Captain Wei's radio communications with ground personnel provided a detailed aerial assessment of the scene that would prove crucial for planning the rescue operation. I have 2 victims visible in the meadow, both motionless, with a very large bear maintaining close proximity. The bear appears agitated by our presence and is not retreating. I cannot safely land with the animal present. Lieutenant Chen, using high-powered binoculars to assess the victims' conditions, provided grim medical assessments that were recorded in the incident report. Both visible victims show severe trauma consistent with animal attack, significant blood loss, and possible dismemberment visible from altitude. Without immediate medical intervention, survival chances are minimal even if we can access the scene. The helicopter's extended hovering over the meadow served an unexpected purpose. The noise and activity drew Bear 274's attention away from his cached victims and toward the perceived aerial threat, allowing ground personnel to get a clearer view of the casualties and plan potential intervention strategies. However, the bear's continued aggression made it clear that any rescue attempt would require neutralizing the animal before approaching the victims. At 11:45 a.m., Yosemite's wildlife management specialist, Dr. Maria Santos, arrived at the scene with specialized equipment for managing dangerous wildlife situations. Dr. Santos, a 43-year-old biologist with a doctorate in wildlife behavior from UC Davis, had been studying Yosemite's bear population for 15 years and was familiar with Bear 274's behavioral patterns and history. Dr. Santos immediately recognized the bear from her previous research and understood that his reduced fear of humans, combined with the territorial aggression he was displaying, made him an extreme threat that could not be safely managed through standard wildlife control methods. Her radio communication to Incident Command was unambiguous. "This is Dr. Santos. I have positive identification of Bear 274. And based on his behavior and the presence of human casualties, I'm recommending immediate lethal intervention." The decision to authorize lethal force against Bear 274 was made at 11:52 a.m. by Yosemite Park Superintendent Michael Thompson, following consultation with the Regional Wildlife Management Supervisor and the Park Service's Emergency Operations Center. The decision was based on multiple factors: the bear's active aggression toward rescue personnel, his apparent predatory behavior rather than defensive action, and the possibility that victims might still be alive and require immediate medical attention. The actual implementation of the lethal intervention was assigned to Park Ranger Thomas Mitchell, a former military sniper with extensive experience in precision shooting under high-stress conditions. Ranger Mitchell had been specially trained for wildlife management situations requiring lethal force and had been involved in 3 previous bear shooting incidents during his 8-year tenure at Yosemite. At 12:07 p.m., Ranger Mitchell positioned himself approximately 150 yards from Bear 274's location and fired a single .338 Winchester Magnum round that struck the bear behind the left shoulder, penetrating the heart and causing nearly instantaneous death. The shot was captured by news helicopters that had begun arriving at the scene, providing footage that would be broadcast worldwide within hours of the incident. Bear 274's death finally allowed rescue personnel to approach the casualties, but the medical assessments confirmed the worst fears of the rescue team. Tyler Morrison had sustained massive trauma to his head, neck, and torso, with injuries that were immediately fatal. David Kim had survived longer, possibly remaining conscious through much of his mauling, but had succumbed to blood loss and shock approximately 20 minutes before the bear was neutralized. The discovery of Chloe Ramirez, alive in her tree, came at 12:19 p.m., when her desperate shouts finally attracted the attention of rescue personnel searching the area for additional victims. Her survival was attributed to her quick thinking in climbing beyond the bear's reach and her ability to remain silent and motionless for over 2 hours while the bear guarded the meadow. Chloe's extraction from her tree required specialized high-angle rescue equipment, as she had climbed nearly 30 feet high and was suffering from exhaustion, dehydration, and shock that made climbing down dangerous. Paramedic Chen, who had been lowered from the rescue helicopter, conducted the first medical assessment of a survivor and found her to be physically uninjured but in severe psychological shock. The helicopter extraction of Chloe from the scene occurred at 12:43 p.m., beginning her journey to Mercy General Hospital in Modesto, the nearest trauma center equipped to handle the psychological and medical needs of a bear attack survivor. During the flight, she remained largely catatonic, responding only minimally to medical personnel and showing signs of severe acute stress reaction that would require extensive psychiatric intervention. The media response to the Yosemite bear attack began within minutes of Chloe's live stream ending, as her viewers immediately began sharing recordings and screenshots across all major social media platforms. The hashtag Chloe's bear attack began trending globally within 2 hours of the incident, as millions of users shared their reactions to the live-streamed violence and debated the ethics of Chloe's decision to stream the encounter. The viral nature of the content created unprecedented challenges for both social media platforms and news organizations. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and other platforms were flooded with graphic video clips from the live stream, many of which violated their community standards regarding violent content. The platform's content moderation systems, designed to handle typical violations, were overwhelmed by the volume and viral nature of the bear attack footage. News organizations faced difficult editorial decisions about how much of the live stream content to broadcast or publish. The footage provided compelling and newsworthy documentation of a wildlife attack, but also contained extremely graphic violence that could be traumatic for viewers. Most major networks opted to show only brief, heavily edited clips, while focusing their coverage on the broader issues raised by the incident. The first major news report about the bear attack aired on CNN at 2:17 p.m. Pacific Time, less than 4 hours after the incident occurred. The report, anchored by Anderson Cooper, focused on the emerging details of the attack while carefully avoiding the most graphic elements of the live stream. Cooper's reporting established the narrative framework that would dominate media coverage for weeks. The story of social media influencers taking increasingly dangerous risks for content, with tragic consequences. By evening on May 9th, the bear attack had become the dominant news story across multiple media platforms. The combination of live-streamed violence, social media celebrity, and wilderness adventure created a perfect storm of public interest that drove unprecedented engagement numbers for news outlets covering the story. The incident sparked immediate debates about influencer culture, platform responsibility, and the psychology of audiences who consume extreme content. The investigation into the bear attack began immediately upon the recovery of the victims' bodies and was conducted jointly by the National Park Service, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The multi-agency approach reflected the complexity of the incident, which involved federal lands, endangered species laws, and potential criminal liability for decisions made during the content creation process. Lead investigator Special Agent Patricia Rodriguez of the National Park Service's Investigative Services Branch had extensive experience with both wildlife crimes and social media-related incidents. Her investigation focused on several key questions: whether the content creators had violated park regulations in their choice of location and activities, whether their actions had contributed to the aggressive behavior displayed by Bear 274, and whether criminal charges were appropriate for any of the survivors or associated parties. The forensic analysis of the scene provided detailed insights into the sequence of events and the bear's behavior patterns. Examination of Bear 274's stomach contents revealed that he had been feeding primarily on natural foods in the days leading up to the attack, contradicting initial theories that human food sources had contributed to his aggression. However, the analysis of his behavioral patterns suggested that his orphaned upbringing and previous exposure to humans had reduced his natural fear responses and made him more likely to view humans as competitors rather than threats to avoid. The technical analysis of the live stream and associated video footage provided investigators with an unprecedented documentary record of a bear attack. Frame-by-frame analysis of the video allowed researchers to precisely time the sequence of events, analyze the bear's body language and motivations, and understand the decision-making processes of the human participants. This footage became a valuable resource for wildlife management training and bear safety education programs. Chloe's hospitalization at Mercy General extended for 6 days, during which she received both medical treatment for her physical exhaustion and initial psychiatric intervention for the severe trauma she had experienced. Her psychological evaluation revealed symptoms consistent with acute stress disorder, survivor guilt, and what psychiatrists termed performative trauma related to her role in broadcasting the attack to her massive audience. Dr. Amanda Foster, the psychiatrist assigned to Chloe's case, noted in her initial assessment that the patient's psychological trauma was complicated by the public nature of her survival and the viral spread of content showing her friends' deaths. The patient is experiencing not only the normal trauma responses associated with witnessing violence and fearing for her life, but also guilt and shame related to her role in creating and broadcasting content that documented her friends' deaths for entertainment purposes. The social media response to Chloe's survival was deeply polarized, reflecting broader cultural divisions about personal responsibility, social media culture, and the ethics of extreme content creation. Supporters praised her survival skills and expressed sympathy for her traumatic experience, while critics blamed her for creating the dangerous situation that led to her friends' deaths. The hashtag Chloe's Wild Adventures became a battleground for these competing narratives, with millions of posts arguing both sides of the controversy. The legal implications of the incident began emerging during Chloe's hospitalization as attorneys representing the families of Tyler Morrison and David Kim filed wrongful death lawsuits against Chloe, her management company Stellar Digital, and several sponsors who had funded the expedition. The lawsuits alleged that the pursuit of increasingly dangerous content for commercial gain had created a reckless environment that directly contributed to the victims' deaths. Tyler Morrison's family, led by his parents Robert and Sandra Morrison of Scottsdale, Arizona, filed the first lawsuit on May 15th, seeking $50 million in damages and citing negligence, reckless endangerment, and what their attorney termed digital negligence in the planning and execution of dangerous content creation. The lawsuit specifically argued that Chloe and her team had prioritized content value over safety considerations and had ignored multiple warning signs about bear activity in the area. David Kim's family filed a separate lawsuit 3 days later, seeking $25 million in damages and including additional defendants, such as the equipment manufacturers whose products had been used to document the attack. The Kim family's attorney argued that the commercial nature of the expedition created a duty of care that had been breached by inadequate safety planning and risk assessment. The sponsors and management company named in the lawsuits immediately retained separate legal counsel and began distancing themselves from the specific decisions made during the expedition. Stellar Digital released a statement expressing sympathy for the victims, while noting that they had not been involved in the day-to-day planning of the content creation activities. Several sponsors announced the immediate termination of their relationships with Chloe and implemented new safety requirements for future influencer partnerships. The National Park Service's investigation concluded on June 3rd with a comprehensive report that found multiple contributing factors to the tragic incident. The report cited the content creators' failure to follow established bear safety protocols, their choice of a location with known recent bear activity, and their decision to continue filming in the presence of a dangerous animal. However, The report also noted that Bear 274's behavioral history and reduced fear of humans made him an exceptionally dangerous animal that might have posed a threat regardless of the specific actions taken by the victims. The investigation resulted in federal charges against Chloe for violations of park regulations related to commercial filming without proper permits and disturbing wildlife in a protected area. These charges, while relatively minor compared to the wrongful death lawsuits, carried potential penalties of up to 6 months in federal prison and $10,000 in fines. The charges were seen largely as symbolic, reflecting the Park Service's need to enforce regulations and deter similar behavior by other content creators. Chloe's criminal trial began on September 12, 2024, in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of California. The trial attracted national media attention and became a focal point for debates about social media culture, personal responsibility, and the appropriate role of government in regulating online content creation. Chloe's defense team, led by prominent criminal attorney Marcus Williams, argued that she was herself a victim of the attack and that prosecuting a trauma survivor for regulatory violations was inappropriate. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Chen, argued that Chloe's violations of park regulations had directly contributed to the dangerous situation that resulted in 2 deaths. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the live stream footage and expert testimony from wildlife biologists who argued that the content creator's behavior had increased the likelihood of an aggressive encounter with Bear 274. The trial featured extensive testimony from wildlife experts, park rangers, and social media analysts who provided context for both the specific incident and the broader cultural phenomenon of extreme content creation. Dr. Maria Santos, the wildlife biologist who had been present during the Bear's shooting, testified about Bear 274's behavioral history and the factors that made him particularly dangerous. Her testimony established that while the bear's aggression was unusually severe, the content creator's actions had likely triggered his territorial response. Social media expert Dr. Rebecca Martinez testified about the economic and psychological pressures that drive influencers to create increasingly extreme content, providing context for understanding Chloe's decision-making process. Her testimony revealed that Chloe's recent content had shown declining engagement rates, creating financial pressure to produce more dramatic material to maintain her income and relevance. The defense called several character witnesses who testified to Chloe's previous commitment to outdoor safety and her genuine love of wilderness experiences. These witnesses, including several other outdoor influencers and adventure photographers, argued that the incident was an unforeseeable tragedy rather than the result of reckless behavior. However, their testimony was undermined by evidence of Chloe's previous close calls and her pattern of ignoring safety recommendations when they conflicted with content creation goals. The trial concluded on October 8th with Chloe's conviction on 2 misdemeanor counts of violating park regulations. Judge Sarah Hamilton sentenced her to 4 months in federal minimum security prison, followed by 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service focused on wilderness safety education. The sentence was seen as relatively lenient given the tragic consequences of her actions, reflecting the judge's recognition that Chloe was herself a victim of the incident. The wrongful death lawsuits were settled out of court in February 2025, with Chloe's insurance carriers paying approximately $12 million to the Morrison family and $8 million to the Kim family. The settlement agreements included non-disclosure clauses that prevented the families from discussing the specific terms, but both families released statements expressing their hope that the tragedy would lead to improved safety standards for social media content creation. The broader impact of the Yosemite Bear attack extended far beyond the immediate legal and financial consequences for those involved. The incident sparked a national conversation about influencer culture and led to significant changes in how social media platforms handle dangerous content. All major platforms implemented new policies requiring safety disclaimers for outdoor adventure content and prohibiting the monetization of videos that show creators engaging in activities that violate local laws or safety regulations. The National Park Service implemented new regulations requiring special permits for all commercial content creation in wilderness areas, regardless of the size of the production crew or the platforms on which the content would be distributed. These regulations, known informally as the Chloe Rules, required safety plans, wildlife expert consultation, and emergency communication equipment for any commercial filming in bear habitat or other dangerous environments. Several outdoor gear companies used the incident as a catalyst to develop and market improved safety equipment specifically designed for content creators. Emergency communication devices became standard equipment recommendations for outdoor influencers, and several companies began offering specialized insurance policies for content creators working in high-risk environments. The psychological impact of the incident extended to the millions of people who had watched Chloe's live stream or viewed the subsequent viral videos. Mental health professionals reported increases in trauma-related counseling requests from individuals who had witnessed the attack through social media. This led to new research into the psychological effects of consuming violent content through social media platforms and the development of new therapeutic approaches for treating vicarious trauma. Educational institutions began incorporating the Yosemite incident into curricula related to social media, ethics, and outdoor recreation. The case became a standard example in business schools discussing influencer marketing ethics and in communications programs examining the responsibilities of content creators. Several wilderness education programs developed specific training modules based on the incident to teach proper safety protocols for outdoor content creation. Bear 274's death prompted significant changes in wildlife management practices throughout the national park system. The incident highlighted the dangers posed by bears with reduced fear of humans and led to new protocols for monitoring and managing potentially dangerous individual animals. The GPS collar that had malfunctioned before the attack led to improved wildlife tracking technology and better communication systems between park wildlife departments. Research into bear behavior benefited enormously from the detailed video documentation of the attack. The footage provided scientists with unprecedented insights into predatory behavior in grizzly bears and helped refine understanding of the factors that can trigger aggressive encounters. This research contributed to improved bear safety education programs and more effective strategies for preventing human-bear conflicts. The media coverage of the incident evolved over the months following the attack, shifting from sensational reporting of the viral videos to more substantive examination of the cultural and technological factors that contributed to the tragedy. Documentary filmmakers began working on projects examining the broader implications of the incident for social media culture and outdoor recreation safety. The story became a case study in journalism schools for discussing the ethics of covering violent viral content and the responsibilities of news organizations in the digital age. Chloe's life, after her release from federal prison, was marked by ongoing struggles with trauma, public scrutiny, and financial difficulties. The combination of legal fees, settlement payments, and the complete collapse of her social media career left her deeply in debt and dependent on family support. She attempted to rebuild her online presence several times, but each effort was met with intense criticism and harassment from users who blamed her for her friends' deaths. In March 2025, Chloe published a memoir titled Surviving the Wild: A Journey Through Tragedy and Redemption, which provided her first detailed account of the bear attack and its aftermath. The book became a bestseller, though it was also heavily criticized for what many saw as an attempt to profit from the tragedy that had killed her friends. The proceeds from the book were used primarily to pay remaining legal debts and to fund a scholarship program for outdoor education in Tyler and David's names. The scholarship program, administered through the National Outdoor Leadership School, provides funding for young people from underserved communities to participate in wilderness education programs that emphasize safety, environmental stewardship, and ethical outdoor recreation. The program has funded over 200 scholarships since its inception and has been praised as a positive legacy emerging from the tragic incident. Tyler Morrison's family established the Tyler Morrison Foundation, focused on promoting outdoor safety education and preventing similar tragedies through improved training and equipment for outdoor recreationists. The foundation works with schools, youth organizations, and outdoor clubs to provide safety training and emergency communication equipment to young people participating in outdoor activities. David Kim's family channeled their grief into advocacy for better mental health support for families of trauma victims. They established a support network for families dealing with sudden, violent loss and worked with mental health organizations to develop specialized therapeutic approaches for dealing with trauma that has been witnessed by large audiences through social media. The long-term impact of the Yosemite bear attack on the influencer industry was significant and lasting. The incident marked a turning point in public perception of extreme content creation, with audiences becoming more critical of creators who appeared to prioritize views and engagement over safety considerations. This shift in audience attitudes led to changes in the types of content that achieved viral success and influenced platform algorithms to deprioritize potentially dangerous content. Insurance companies began requiring extensive safety protocols and risk assessments for policies covering social media content creators working in outdoor or high-risk environments. These requirements led to the development of a new industry of safety consultants and risk management professionals specializing in content creation, fundamentally changing how dangerous content is planned and executed. The incident also contributed to broader discussions about the responsibility of social media platforms for content created by their users. While platforms generally maintained their stance that they were not responsible for users' offline activities, the Yosemite incident provided compelling evidence of the potential real-world consequences of platform algorithms that rewarded increasingly extreme content with greater reach and monetization opportunities. Academic researchers studying social media and psychology identified the incident as a watershed moment in the evolution of digital culture, marking the point where the potential dangers of viral content creation became undeniable to mainstream audiences. The incident became a standard case study in courses on digital media, ethics, and consumer psychology, providing a concrete example of how technological systems can create incentives for dangerous behavior. The wilderness areas where the attack occurred were affected in multiple ways by the incident and its aftermath. Bear Valley, despite its unofficial name not appearing on maps, became a destination for morbid curiosity seekers and true crime enthusiasts, requiring increased park ranger presence and eventually temporary closure to public access. The area has since reopened with enhanced safety signage and regular patrol schedules to prevent similar incidents. The incident led to improved trail signage throughout Yosemite and other national parks, with new warnings about wildlife dangers and specific guidance for visitors planning to create content during their visits. These signs include QR codes linking to online resources about wildlife safety and emergency procedures, representing an adaptation of traditional park communication methods to the digital age. The scientific value of the video documentation from the attack continued to provide insights years after the incident. Researchers studying animal behavior, emergency response procedures, and human psychology under extreme stress have all benefited from the unprecedented detailed record of the event. This research has contributed to improved training programs for wilderness professionals, better emergency response protocols, and enhanced understanding of trauma and survival psychology. The legal precedents established by the various court cases arising from the incident have influenced subsequent litigation involving social media content creators and dangerous activities. The settlements and judgments have been cited in numerous other cases involving influencer liability, platform responsibility, and the duty of care owed by content creators to both their collaborators and their audiences. The families of the victims have worked to ensure that Tyler and David are remembered for their lives and contributions, rather than solely for the circumstances of their deaths. Memorial services held annually on May 9th celebrate their memories, while also serving as opportunities to educate others about outdoor safety and responsible content creation. These events have become important gatherings for the outdoor education and social media safety communities. The technological innovations spurred by the incident have had lasting benefits for outdoor safety beyond the content creation community. Emergency communication devices have become more affordable and accessible, GPS tracking technology has improved, and wilderness medicine techniques have advanced partly due to research motivated by understanding the medical aspects of the attack and the challenges faced by rescue personnel. The incident's impact on bear management and human-wildlife conflict prevention has been substantial and positive. The detailed documentation of Bear 274's behavior provided wildlife managers with valuable insights that have improved protocols for monitoring potentially dangerous individual animals. The tracking and early intervention systems developed in response to the incident have prevented numerous other potential conflicts between humans and wildlife. The educational materials developed in the wake of the incident have reached millions of people through schools, outdoor organizations, and online platforms. The safety lessons learned from the tragedy have undoubtedly prevented other accidents and fatalities, providing a positive legacy from the terrible events of that May morning in Yosemite. The story of the Yosemite bear attack serves as a complex cautionary tale about the intersection of technology, nature, and human behavior in the 21st century. While the immediate tragedy cannot be undone, the comprehensive response from multiple sectors of society has created lasting improvements in safety, education, and our understanding of the responsibilities that come with the power to reach and influence millions of people through digital platforms. The incident remains a subject of ongoing study and discussion, with new insights continuing to emerge as researchers analyze the vast documentation created during and after the attack. The comprehensive record of the event, from the live stream footage through the legal proceedings and their aftermath, provides an unprecedented case study in crisis, response, and recovery in the digital age. As technology continues to evolve and new platforms emerge for content creation and distribution, the lessons learned from the Yosemite bear attack remain relevant and important. The incident serves as a permanent reminder that the pursuit of digital fame and engagement must be balanced against fundamental considerations of safety, ethics, and respect for both human life and the natural world that provides the backdrop for so much online content. The lasting impact of May 9th, 2024, extends far beyond the immediate tragedy, encompassing changes in technology, regulation, education, and cultural attitudes that continue to influence how we approach the relationship between digital media and real-world risk. The story of Chloe Ramirez, Tyler Morrison, David Kim, and Bear274 has become an integral part of the ongoing conversation about responsibility, safety, and the true cost of viral fame in our interconnected digital world.